The following stories describe encounters that are becoming more and more common in recent years. As always, the following stories are raw and unedited and somewhat terrifying. These are told in the way that they were sent in. We do ask that you please respect those who have shared their stories and also respect everyone in the comments section while discussing these stories. Bill and myself have both had our fair share of bizarre encounters, and that's why we feel it's important to provide an outlet for others to share their strange experiences. Again, I want to stress that the following accounts are frightening and some are downright bizarre. So sit back, relax, and let's begin. Unsettling event I encountered in the woods of North Idaho. I grew up in the rural woods of the Midwest. My grandparents had a cabin on 160 acres in the Ozarks, and my family home was in the woods of Ohio. I now live out west in a large city with my husband and kids, but his family has a cabin in northern Idaho where we spend a lot of time in the summer. That's where this all took place. So when I say I know the woods, I really do. This happened a few years ago, in the middle of summer. We had arrived at the cabin only to realize my husband somehow had totally spaced and forgot to pack my hiking boots. I was livid because all I had on were cheap flip-flops, and I'd been so looking forward to hiking that weekend. It kind of put a sour mood to the evening, and we settled in. The cabin isn't much, and though in the woods, it's part of a community or a cluster of other cabins. The one perk to ours is that it's right against a large field surrounded by woods. It's private property, and there's some weird stories and history with the family that owns it, but that field is mostly abandoned. We have a 4-foot barbed wire fence that runs the length of the field to separate our land from that. It's not too far from the cabin, I'd say maybe 20 feet from our porch to the fence line. That night after dinner, I made up the air mattresses for the kids, folded out the sofa bed for us. Soon everyone else was asleep, but since I have horrible insomnia, I was still up around 2 a.m., reading my Kindle and sipping wine, when I heard the most god-awful noise. I slipped my flip-flops on and poked my head out the front door. There was a sound coming from the field. I stepped out onto the porch to listen more intently. It's the sound of a coyote being hurt. At first I thought possibly it was stuck in a trap, and I got so angry. My husband's family are known for our dogs, and the idea someone was trapping near us made me so angry. I cannot tell you how or why, but every cell in my body was screaming for me to help it. I ran inside to get a flashlight. It was a new moon, so zero light outside, and once again found myself upset I didn't have my boots. There was no way I was going to make it even to the fence line in my flip-flops. Between the woods and terrain, it was happening near the corner of our property that can best be called a trash heap. An abandoned camper, a wood pile, metal drums for burning, etc. I had no idea what I could even do to help, but I just so badly felt like I had to do something. So I went back outside, and all I could do was listen. The more I listened, the more I realized it was being attacked by something. And that's when the hair on my neck stood up. I realized everything was dead quiet. I have never before or after heard the woods like that. Whatever was attacking the coyote was also doing it silently. No snarl, no bark, or yip, no growl. And as I stood there frozen and listening, I heard the final noises as the coyote died. I had tears in my eyes because it was such an awful sound. As soon as it died, I was hit with the force of the sounds around me. Suddenly the neighbors' dogs were howling and barking. The bugs and crickets started up. It was like a switch had been flipped. It went from no sound to all the sounds in the blink of an eye. And that's when I heard the footsteps. Whatever had attacked the coyote was suddenly on our side of the fence. It was walking along the fence line, and it clearly was bipedal. I cannot stress this enough. I grew up in the woods. Humans and animals sound different, and this sounded human. It was clearly walking on two legs. I kept staring along the line, trying to see whatever it was. But as the footsteps grew closer to the middle of the property, and I still couldn't see anything, I panicked and ran quickly back into the cabin. I locked the door and grabbed a hatchet and woke my husband up. I couldn't believe he was able to sleep through everything. He hadn't heard a thing. The next morning, we went directly to where I told him the sound was coming from, the attack, but couldn't see anything. Though the field at that time of year is like 4-foot tall grass, and we didn't expect to see anything, and I was not about to hop the fence to go looking for trouble. I will say I had never been so thankful to not have had boots that weekend, because without a doubt, I would have tried to hop that fence that night. I just know I would have. Something in me was screaming out to make it stop. Anyway, I'm sure this is rambling a bit, but I felt so alone on this for years. My husband believes me, but, we have no logical answers. Thank you. Anonymous. My story of little people. My story occurred in Jeddito, Arizona. This incident occurred during the summer of 1983 when I was 11 years old. I remember I was 11 years old because that's the summer my father quit racing horses and started staying home. So this particular evening, I went for a walk with my siblings and my 2 dogs. My dogs would always be way ahead of us in the woods somewhere chasing squirrels or something. I was ahead of everyone too, trying to beat them to the hill. Right before the hill, there's an old house down in a little valley. As I was walking past the old house, I saw something move out of my peripheral vision to my right. As I looked to my right, down at the ground, I saw small people, about 10 of them, maybe more. They all stopped in their tracks and stared at me in shock. I was in shock, too, about what I just came upon. I remember they were about a foot tall, with black short hair, maybe shoulder-length and bushy. They were all naked, no clothes on, but they had no private parts, so I don't know if they were all males. 2 of them were carrying a can, which was a Spam can. One was in front, and the other was in back, carrying the back end of the can. Those were the ones I spotted first, and then I saw the rest. They all were carrying something in their hands. They all had long, skinny arms and long, skinny legs. As I started walking towards them, they all dropped what they had in their hands and ran together toward this single area by a big sage bush. One by one, they all sank into the ground. I stopped in my tracks, too, when I saw them going into the ground. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. When they'd all gone into the ground, I ran to the same area and started digging. I dug out sand about a foot deep, but I couldn't find anything. That particular area is sandy because the water runs through there when it rains. As my siblings walked up to me and asked what I was doing, I told them what I'd just seen, and I showed them the small footprints and what they'd left behind. I went back there every day for the whole summer, but I never saw them again. I even sat on a big boulder nearby and watched if they would come out. Never did. My family still owns that land, so when I go there, which is once in a great while, I go by and check for footprints. Nothing yet. I will never forget what I saw that day. I'm glad I got to experience something so incredible like that. I'm glad my dogs never came upon them, because I don't know what would have happened. I've never told my story to anyone before. Only my parents, my siblings, my husband, and my kids know about my experience. My father told me to stay away from them, as they're a part of Mother Earth, too. I don't remember what he calls them. He said it in either Spanish or Navajo, so I don't remember. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. Renee. Yosemite Half Dome. This happened around August of 2019. I'm not sure what we experienced or if there was anything odd about it, but whatever. It's also a bit of a long story. Sorry about that. So, this was a hike up to Half Dome. We had a campground about a 20-minute drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of me, an 18-year-old male, my uncle, a 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend, whom I'll call D. There were 2 girls with us, but they aren't relevant to the story. My uncle and his friend are both Christian, so there were no substances consumed that could induce the feelings I will be talking about. We get to our campsite, set up camp, and go to sleep after eating. We plan to wake up at 4 a.m. and start the hike by 4:30. I randomly wake up at 3:30 a.m., like completely wide awake, and look out of my hammock, and I remember feeling this odd feeling, as if I was woken up by something. And I remember looking out at the moonlit scene. The moon was very bright for some reason, and thinking to myself, it looks like a dream. I lay back in the hammock but can't go to sleep, and end up waking up my uncle and friend at 3:50 a.m. My uncle asked me, "Were you walking around at night?" This is important. And I say no, and ask why. He says he woke up for some reason and could hear someone walking around. Not like an animal, but a person. I say, weird, and we brush it off. We get to the trailhead around 4:30 a.m., and as everyone is unloading from the car, he says he's going to use the bathroom, which there are a couple of before the trailhead. I walk behind him for some time before falling behind and waiting for my uncle, who forgot something in the car. The short, straight road from the parking lot runs directly into a T intersection with a road to the trailhead, and the bathroom is directly across from the intersection through a field a little ways. Those who have been there know what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for D to come out of the bathroom. We wait about 10 minutes before I go and check the bathroom, and he isn't there. I get back to my uncle and tell him that. He says, weird, maybe he went back to the car or something. We decide to wait a little bit more. By 5:10, we were beginning to worry. My uncle goes to check the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure we don't miss him if he went down the road away from the trailhead. My uncle returns, says he isn't there either. We decide maybe he went up to the trailhead without us for some reason and walk up there in about 10 minutes. He isn't there either. We're kind of baffled now because there are no other logical places he would go. I decide to run back and check the car and the bathroom again. I meet him halfway before I get to the intersection. He's sweaty and disheveled with a weird look in his eyes. I say, where have you been? He says that he went to the bathroom, and when he got back to the intersection that we weren't there, and that he just assumed we went to the trailhead and started walking, and then he met me. I say, what do you mean? We waited at the intersection for over half an hour, checked at the car, bathroom, and trailhead, and you weren't there. He says, well, I don't know. I went to the bathroom. He then asked me where my uncle is. I say at the trailhead, and he asked me again, and I tell him again. And note that it was weird that he asked me twice. As we're crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees a light off on the riverbank and exclaims, oh, maybe that's him. And I just look at him and keep walking. I thought his behavior was very strange, like he wasn't thinking straight. We finally get on with the hike, and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight, one of the girls' gloves, a water bottle, etc. It's like we just simply forgot about the items and couldn't remember where we could have left them. On the way back, it got dark, and we turned on our flashlights. And as we near the end of the hike, after the two waterfalls, it begins to seem as if we've been walking far too long. My uncle confirms this, asking me, "Doesn't it seem like it's taking way longer to get back?" I say, "Yeah, I was just thinking that." We keep walking, but it still seems like we're not making any progress. I've been on that trail many times. As I was walking, I couldn't spot any familiar landmarks. It was weird. There was this odd feeling in the air, sort of a slight menacing feeling. It's hard to describe. I remember thinking, it feels like the woods are alive. We remarked 3 more times about how long the hike is taking and began to laugh at it because it felt so ridiculous. After a bit, we finally and suddenly find ourselves on the final stretch and make it back to the car. Now, all this seemed odd at the time, but I just brushed it off. I only realized how weird those events felt after we got home, and my aunt asked my uncle, "Were you camping?" And he says, "Yeah, how did you know?" As we didn't tell them we were going since it was kind of last minute. She says that she had an odd dream where she saw my uncle in a tent in a forest, and someone was outside of his tent. She says she couldn't see who it was, but knew there was a presence there. She says she woke up around 3 a.m. and had the strong urge to pray for him, and she did. My uncle kind of looks at me after that like, "Are you hearing this shit?" Thank you for allowing me to share my story. Tim. Strange experience in Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. I had a very strange experience 12 years ago in Starved Rock State Park, Illinois. It was so bizarre at the time, I never discussed it. I began reading the missing 411 stories a few weeks ago and realized what I encountered fits into the missing 411 profile. Additionally, since many of the missing 411 stories border on the unexplainable and bizarre, I feel what I encountered was not unique, that it was part of an actual phenomenon. Here's my story. I was visiting my girlfriend in Chicago. On a sunny and calm winter day, we decided to go for a hike at Starved Rock State Park. I'm an avid hiker, and being on leave from Iraq, I wanted to take in some cool, fresh air. We hiked the park for several hours. In late afternoon, we started heading back to the car. About a half-mile away from the parking lot, we came into an area where tree branches were broken and pulled towards or over the trail. Most of the branches were broken high up, I'd say 8 feet and more off the ground. I lived in Washington State before going to Iraq and knew something of Sasquatch areas. So I told the girlfriend it looked like a squatch area due to the branches broken off up high and pulled over the trail. That's about the time things started to get strange. Soon after mentioning this, I felt like someone was staring at me. It's like if you go in a room with a lot of people and someone is focused on you, you get an uneasy feeling and can tell you're being watched. It was like this, but stronger. I started to look around to see who was watching me. It was winter and the forest was visible hundreds of feet in all directions. There was a group of walkers several hundred feet behind us and no one in front of us, but I saw no one staring at me. As we passed through the squatch area, I began to have the feeling someone was behind me, following us. I looked around and listened, but saw and heard nothing. There was just people 400 feet or so back on the trail, and they were talking amongst themselves. They weren't looking our way. The sense of someone being behind me was persistent, so I kept looking behind me, I'd say at least twice a minute. But there was just the group way back there. The feeling of being watched is one thing, but feeling like someone is close behind you is something else. It is more disturbing. I told the girlfriend to go further in front of me and let her go about 20 feet in front because I had a strong sensation of a nearby presence just behind us. So I turned around not more than 30 seconds since the last time I looked back, and there's this woman there. She was walking, but coming up on me fast. There was something way off about her speed. She was walking when I spotted her, but her speed was much faster than her gait. It was as if she were on a people mover escalator like in an airport. She was coming up fast and was, I'd say, no more than 15 or 20 feet behind me when I saw her. I was rather alarmed and glared at her. She stopped when our eyes met. I gave her a look like, WTF are you doing coming upon me like that? We stood there staring at each other. Neither of us moved. She had her head cocked back to her left and looked at me from the corner of her eyes in a slightly alarmed, you caught me type of look. She was completely normal looking, like a local Chicago lady, late 50s, wearing a bright red winter coat, gloves, slacks, etc. In hindsight, there are a few other things besides her speed which stand out. The first thing is there was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling in the woods, nothing to tell me to turn around other than the strong sense of something behind me, which I'd had for a bit. At the speed she was moving, she would have had to have been running hard, but I heard no footsteps. She was not breathing hard and her mouth was closed. Her gait was a walking gait. She was not running. However, she was moving towards me at a running speed. I mean fast. When she stopped, I'd say she was less than 20 feet from me. At the speed she was moving, in 1 or 2 seconds, she'd have been on me. The next thing that stands out is her features. She had no distinguishing features. None in her hair, skin, or clothing. No shadowing or skin hues, dimples, etc. As a former Army criminal investigator, I know to look for distinctive markings on people and clothing. There were none. I'd estimate her height at 5 foot 10 inches. Her clothes were of uniform coloring and indistinct. It was like she just stepped out of a department store. Her bright red coat was pristine with a uniform hue to it. There wasn't even shading, which there should have been given the clear sky and low sun. After staring at each other for, I'd say, 5 to 10 seconds, I felt like I got my point across, so I turned around and continued walking. The girlfriend had not noticed anything and had continued walking. I took about 3 steps and realized there was no way she could have come up from that group in the 30 or so seconds since I'd last looked back. There was also nowhere to come from on either side. Visibility at that point was hundreds of feet all around. I said to myself, no way, and spun back around. She was gone, simply vanished. I checked the group behind us, and no one had a red coat on or was looking at us. There was no one else around, and there had been no sounds other than my footfalls. The woman just vanished. From that point, it took us about 10 minutes to reach the car. For the remainder of the walk, I did not feel like I was being stared at or followed. I've never been back to Starved Rock State Park and have no intention of going back. The whole thing was bizarre. How was I supposed to tell anyone about that? So I never have. My mental state was fine. I have a high IQ and a 20-year career in a STEM field following Army service. At the time, I was working a DoD IT contract in Iraq. I was well rested and relaxed, being on vacation with a girlfriend. There were no drugs or alcohol involved. These are strictly prohibited in my line of work and were grounds for immediate termination under MNFI's GO1, which I was subject to at the time. I've carried this experience around for 12-plus years, being unable to talk about it because it was so exceptional and unexplainable. It's a relief to read similar stories of unusual encounters and disappearances. After reading many missing 411 accounts and the profile of disappearances, I believe I narrowly averted being snatched by whatever that thing was. I do not think it was the woman I saw. I think it was something different which I could not see. Thank you, Anonymous. Eerie footsteps behind us. When I was around 12 years old, my girlfriend and I went with my parents to an isolated cabin that was only accessible by boat in northern Ontario, Canada, near my dad's reservation called Serpent River. Anyway, my brother was swimming in the lake, so my girlfriend and I decided to hike up a hill that ended up being quite steep with cedar trees all around us. So as we were making our way up, we decided to sit down and take a rest as the ground was covered in cedar needles and quite comfortable. As we were sitting there, we were chatting because we could see my brother swimming in the lake. From quite up high on the hill we climbed, then all of a sudden the ground was shaking underneath our butts like something so heavy was running behind us. It scared the daylights out of both of us, and we hightailed it down that hill. We did look behind us, but we could only feel it and could not see anything. To this day, I've always wondered what it could be. We thought the only possible thing that could make the ground vibrate like that might be a moose, but then again, I just couldn't see how or why a moose would be so high up on a hillside with rocks and cedar trees. It still perplexes me to this day. Anonymous. Unexplained, invisible or cloaked being / humanoid. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing by the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandmother just kept an eye on me from the kitchen or living room because the house had huge windows that faced the woods. She would come out every once in a while just to see what I was up to. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention this is Midwest Illinois, not too far from Cahokia Mounds, so finding arrowheads was actually not that uncommon. Anyway, that day, I remember picking out a spot to dig. I'd been out there for quite a while because I remember I had a pretty decent-sized hole going when something caught my eye up in the tree that I was next to. I almost don't know how to explain it, but it looked like almost a heat wave coming off the branch of the tree. It was fall. I remember this because I had my pink jacket on and remember thinking my mom was going to be pissed because I had dirt around the bottom of the arms from digging. I also remember there being a lot of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I'm staring at this heat wave and realize it has a human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, and wondering why there's an invisible man in the tree. I remember feeling scared but unsure what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. This is about the time that I decided that I was not supposed to be seeing this, and I hightailed it back to the house. My grandmother saw I was pretty shaken, and I remember telling her that I just saw an angel. In my 5-year-old mind, I didn't know what else it could be. I'd never heard of aliens or ghosts or monsters, so to me it had to be an angel because that's all my little mind could think of. Fast forward to when I was about 12 years old. By this time, the encounter was way out of my mind. I loved watching action and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called Predator. I'm watching it with him, and the first time you see the Predator, invisible / cloaked, I about shit my pants. All the memories from that day digging in the dirt came flooding back. I even asked my dad if Predator was real, or if he knew of anyone or any animal that had cloaking ability that I didn't know about. He told me it was all fake. It wasn't like it is today, where I could just Google it. I had no access to the internet, so again, I just put it out of my mind. Again, fast forward to about the year 2004. I'm grown now. I have 3 small children. I just went through a separation from my husband. I moved to the next town over to an apartment with my kids. These apartments are all one-level duplexes, with there being 5 buildings. I'm at the very last apartment of the last building. The apartments are considered in town, but are on the outskirts. There's a deep ditch that runs behind the buildings with a chain-link fence that separates the backyard from the ditch. There's about 6 or 7 trees on our side of the fence. And if you follow the ditch a little bit, you hit a small forest that eventually leads to the country, with a larger forest and farmland. I'm a smoker, but would not smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often went out to the back porch. One night I was up late doing laundry and stuff after the kids went to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before I myself went to sleep. So I'm back there on the porch, and I started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately looked to the ditch because I'd seen a groundhog out there a few days before and thought perhaps he was out there again. The yard is faintly lit from the outside light that's by the playground that is to the right of my back porch. I didn't turn on my porch light. I didn't normally if I was just going out for a quick smoke. I didn't see any groundhog or movement from the ditch, so I go back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound keeps happening, and a slight shift of movement makes me look up into the tree to the left of my porch. It's there. The same invisible thing I'd seen when I was 5. It's like a distortion and in a humanoid shape. It's crouched down on the branch with an arm out holding onto the trunk of the tree. I couldn't believe it. I was like, is this happening? Has it come to kill me from me seeing it all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids in the apartment sleeping. I ran in and slammed and locked the door. I ran to the kids' room and made sure all the windows were locked. Then I just turned out the lights in the living room and stared out the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for a good 10 minutes and couldn't see anything. I began to think I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. Just as I was finally talking myself down, a neighbor's dog comes running across the yard and starts barking at the tree at the same branch that I'd seen this predator thing on. That pretty much freaked me out because this dog was not a barker. I've actually never heard him bark at anything, even at the groundhog that had been hanging out at the ditch. This barking went on for a few minutes until I hear the neighbor lady who owns the dog call him back inside. The dog reluctantly turned to go back home, stopping every few feet to look back at the branch of the tree until he was out of my sight. I didn't sleep that night and have never seen anything like it again. I don't know what to think of it. I'm a grown woman. I have kids and a good career. I just want to know if anyone else has ever had an experience like this. I know what I saw, believe it or not. Also, just a strange little side note about my obsession with digging when I was younger. I had an uncanny ability to just know where to dig for stuff. Like I said, I used to dig up arrowheads and unusual rocks and geodes all the time. It was kind of strange. I remember this one time I was fishing with my dad, and when we got back to the camp, I just started randomly digging in a meadow off to the side of the camp. I dug up a whole bunch of marbles. It was weird. They were all pretty deep, too. My dad was pretty amazed by it. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Anonymous. I'm not sure what happened to me in the woods. I don't know if this is the same kind of stuff, but someone said I should post this here. Okay, so I know this is going to sound crazy, and honestly, I've spent a long time reading stories on here and called BS on stories half as crazy as what happened to me. I'm no writer, so I apologize in advance if I don't explain this well. I love creepy stuff and spend a lot of time listening to stories on YouTube and reading them here and various other places. A friend of mine came to me because she knows I love stuff like this and told me she had a strange experience the other night with her boyfriend where she parked near a woods on the edge of town, and just as they were about to start fooling around, something made a creepy giggling noise from the woods. Her boyfriend got out and threw stones into the woods, thinking someone was playing a prank or something. She said he shined his phone light into the woods, and they both saw what looked like tiny people scattering back into the woods. I asked how tiny. She said about the size of her dog, which is a little white fluffy thing. I'm not sure what the type is, but they're really small dogs. I drove up to the woods that night to check it out and parked near where she said she parked, but didn't hear anything. So after a while, I got out of the car and went into the woods to look around. I didn't want to go far in, and I swear I took less than 20 steps into the woods when I heard a laugh. It sounded like a little girl, but off. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but I spun around and pointed my torch to where it had come from, and there was nothing there. Then, as I was looking around for what had made the sound, I realized I was really far into the woods, like seriously far in them, and I couldn't see my car or even the road. I know I hadn't walked that far. I was confused as hell, and when I went to head back the way I came from, I wasn't even on a path. I weirdly didn't panic, though I remember being what I would call drunk calm. Like when someone kicks off a problem in a bar, but you've had a few, so you just have no reaction to it. Like part of you knows you should be reacting, but you're just not. I just looked around and started walking in what I felt was the right direction, but the more I walked, I felt like I was dazed, and I kept thinking it was because it was so hot. It was pretty late at night, so it shouldn't have been. But I felt like I was on a beach on holiday somewhere, and I just kept thinking I need to cool down to clear my head, so I started stripping. I'm seriously not the kind of girl who just strips off, by the way. Like, I'm not shy, but I don't do stuff like that. But my head was just fuzzy, and I was convinced I'd feel better if I took everything off, and I was just dropping everything as I walked. I even dropped my torch, as I just felt like my eyes would see better without it. I don't fully remember what was going on after that. I felt like I was walking for ages, like everything just felt like a dream. But I felt comfortable. Even though I was naked, I still felt like it was really warm. I don't know where I was, but I remember finding a small pond and trying to cool off by splashing the water over my head and then sitting on the edge and dangling my feet in the water. It felt deep, like I was on the edge of a pool, like it was just a straight edge going down, even though it looked like it was a little more than a large puddle. I remember it being really nice and cold when I felt a hand around my ankle, and then a second one around the other. Everything still just felt normal, though, like I was thinking I should slide forward and lower myself in the water because it was so nice and cool. Like even trying to remember it all as much as I'm freaked out feels like just such a peaceful memory. I could feel the hands around my ankles, and I started laughing as something started tickling my feet. I'm not sure how long this went on for, but in my memory, it feels like it was happening for hours. I was just giggling and thinking about getting all the way into the water. I'm not sure what broke me from my daze, but I feel like someone else was there who said something to me. I remember pulling my feet out of the water, the hands letting go without a fight, and then turning around and walking away. Everything is blank, though, after I started walking away. The next thing I remember is being back in my car, suddenly very, very uncomfortable about being naked and starting to panic. I seriously have considered going back in the woods to find my clothes, but thankfully decided against it, as I imagined the few awkward moments getting home were better than risking the woods again. I have no idea what to think about what happened, and I'm pretty sure no one is going to believe me, but I had to tell people about this. I mean, has anyone experienced things like this before? Thank you, Anonymous. Dogman or Unknown Cryptid Encounter. My name's John, and I spent much of my childhood with my father, who taught me how to hunt and fish. We had land in Franklin County, which is the outskirts of Laurel, Indiana. My father built our home, and it was located just about 20 yards from the deep woods off Bulltown Road, which was named that because when the farmers would take their cattle to or from the market, that's the path they would travel. That's now our road. We fished for everything from bluegill to trout to bass, and the most fun, the infamous blue, channel, and flathead catfish. Hunting was no different, from squirrel, rabbits to deer. My dad also showed me how to noodle for snapping turtles, although I never really had the nerve for that. My best times were with him showing me what ginseng, bloodroot, and rhubarb all looked like. I would go on those adventures, although not having much luck finding them as I did the morel mushrooms. I've spent more days and nights in the woods, at riverbanks and lakes than I had ever had or wanted to in some city setting, and these places were my comfort zones, where I felt at peace, where I truly felt alive and closest to my Creator, and never, ever had I experienced anything like what I had in this January of 2010. It was early when I got up and ready to head out squirrel hunting off some property over by my uncle's house, which is really the same romping grounds I ran with when I was just a kid, out hunting with my pop. I was going to use my .22 Marlin, which was a good rifle with a Casco scope, instead of a shotgun, because to me, there was nothing worse than picking out buckshot when you're trying to enjoy a hot plate of fried mushrooms and biscuits with squirrel gravy. I got out in the general area of where I wanted to begin my hunt and found a nice hickory to lean up against. And just as I usually do, I leaned back, got really comfortable, and began to rest my eyes. Catch a nap, I figured really quick, before I get serious with squirrel hunting. So I listened for about 5 minutes to see if I heard them cut in this direction, or that which a squirrel on a cut is what we call them chewing and breaking open hickory and walnut. Just as my usual routine, I fell asleep. I remember when I woke, it was as if I was startled awake, like if someone had clapped loudly to get your attention next to your face. I opened my eyes and was wondering, did I actually hear that, or was that just in my head? I looked up and straight ahead of me and saw something duck down behind a bramble bush that was about 6 to 7 feet tall and about 50 yards out from me. Again, I wondered, am I seeing things as well as hearing them? Now, I grew up hearing aunts and uncles, cousins, and other trusted people telling stories of UFOs. No close encounters, just lights in the sky. And as for Bigfoot, Harry and the Hendersons came out when I was 9 in 1987, and it was something I thought, sure, I can bite on that. This is me as a child thinking the Earth was much bigger than it actually is. The endless redwood forest and the Amazon with Tarzan and the tribes that have never seen civilized man, that's where these creatures roamed. But what I saw, this was something out of a Hollywood movie. I couldn't see very well still. The sun hadn't quite came up over the horizon. As for everything going silent, I was used to that because the birds were barely even awake at this hour. I took my gun and thinking, I'm about to catch someone trespassing on the land. I moved the scope up to my left eye and began to scan the width of the briar bush, which was about 10 to 15 feet, followed by a huge oak tree that ran parallel with the bush. I couldn't make anything out. It all blended in, until I made out a sharply pointed ear. At first I thought it was a bobcat because of the tassel of hair that was protruding out of the ear, but as my eyes finally focused in more and trying to decipher what was just bush and leaves to what was hair and facial features, when I saw an eye on the right side of his face looking at me. It registered to me there's no branches or limbs for any animal such as a bobcat or coyote to be able to appear that's positioning itself upright, and which I saw when I first opened my eyes. I know the moment when I was looking at something I'd never seen before, because it felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped over my head, and almost simultaneously, my teeth began to chatter. At that moment, I knew what I was looking at, and it was most definitely looking at me, had been standing upright. I lowered my rifle because there was no way on God's green earth that I was going to try to fire on this animal, for lack of anything I'd ever seen before, an upright canine. I didn't turn my back on him, but I slowly stood up. I was about maybe 150 yards into the woods. My mind was clear and focused, though. Just don't turn your back. And I walked slowly back to the road and my car. It never showed itself fully, and I'm glad. Since this has happened, I can't bring myself to hike in parks alone. I don't go fishing at night if the area is secluded, and those are just the long-lasting effects. I was about 32 when this happened, so it's been 10 years. I would damn near have panic attacks taking out the garbage. What I grew up loving to do with my father was now something I'm scared to do by myself. My dad had passed away in 1999 to a drunk driver, and this encounter actually happened about 20 days after I lost my mom in 2010 to cancer. So I never had the opportunity for the two people I've been raised by out in the middle of the sticks for their theory on this. I do remember my father telling me one night he went out to the woodshed to grab a wheelbarrow load of firewood for the stove. I was young, so I didn't ask him to elaborate, But he said when he had reached the shed, he heard a growl that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, put him in an utter rush to get back into the house. All he explained other than that was it sure wasn't a bobcat or a coyote. Looking back, I wish I would have pressed for more, because this man noodle snapping turtles and was the only one the old bull of grandpa's would respect. In closing, I've only heard of Dogman in about the last 5 years. I haven't shared my story but maybe with 5 people, and I'll only ever say I saw something in the woods that I can't explain. Because that sounds much more rational than, you guys, I saw a werewolf. But I know I've come about as far as I can to recover from this encounter. With stories of aliens, Bigfoot, Dogman, and missing people, as well as a plethora of other cryptids I've not mentioned. But I can tell you now as I write, if you were to tell me you've seen something in the woods, describe it, can't explain it, I believe you. Because I've had my encounter too. Signed, John. Creature in the woods. This only happened several days ago, so my mind is still pondering what happened. My friend and I are avid outdoorsmen, primitive camping, hiking, etc., etc. There's this local county park with a weird, spooky history. Lots of people with odd sightings, menacing experiences, reportedly witchcraft. You get the idea. Well, we were hiking there and decided to follow a couple game trails. We wanted to get away from the casual hikers and really explore the more unexplored parts of the forest. We'd gone several miles in and came to an area with a lower bush line, so our visibility was pretty good. All of a sudden, a storm of acorns erupted around us, with no wind to speak of. After this incident occurred, we had this overwhelming sense of being watched. We'd gone another several hundred yards when my friend calls out, "What is that?" And when I look towards what he's pointing at, we see this dark humanoid shape standing by a tree. It was around 4 feet tall, dark brown to black in color, and seemed to get highly agitated when I took notice of it. The only way to describe its movement was that it was lightly bouncing back and forth, giving off an aggressive vibe. Instinctively, we both pulled out our knives. My friend also pulled out his axe, and we felt combat was inevitable. It kept watching us, emanating this aggressive energy. For some reason, we decided to move towards it. What happened next, I cannot explain. It simply disappeared. Once we both saw it disappear, we made a beeline to the tree it was at. We can be stupid brave. And there was no sign or sound of anything having been there. We look around, and nothing. There was no way for it to have gotten away without making a sign or even making noise, as the brush wouldn't have allowed that. Sheathing our weapons, we stood there dumbstruck, not sure what had just happened. Thank you, Anonymous. The Summer of Hell. It was the summer of 1996, or better referred to as the Summer of Hell. I can't help but to blame myself. After all, I've watched plenty of horror movies to know all the basic rules, but even then I ignored the most important one. I was young and curious, so attracted to anything horror-related. I played with a spirit board by myself, and if that wasn't enough, I had chanted spells that I found in a spell book written in another language. Frustrated at what I thought was a complete fail since nothing had happened, I continued on with this dangerous combo. A few days had passed, and things began to change. I started hearing strange sounds. For each night that went by, the evil entity became more aggressive. Some call it sleep paralysis, but I know it was an evil force holding me captive. I could hear the growling in my ear and the voices as it whispered to me, calling out my name. I was terrified. I fought so hard to have just enough courage to open my eyes, And then fear would strike again when I would witness with my own eyes a hooded shadow figure by my bed and shadow figures darting in and out of the wall while calling my name. It was getting worse. I could now feel it touching me. It actually touched my foot. It wouldn't let me sleep, and it was as if it were getting stronger. I was so scared, and knowing it was my fault, I didn't want to tell anyone, especially my father. All my family had warned me about tampering with spirit boards. I no longer felt safe in my own home, and every chance I got, I tried to go somewhere hoping that this thing wouldn't follow me. I distinctly remember several occasions where the evil had followed me. My aunt had asked me to stay with her and her family during the week to babysit my little cousin while she worked. I'd fallen asleep, but something had disturbed my sleep. I opened my eyes to the light above me flickering on and off. Immediately got up, left the bedroom, fell asleep on the couch for the rest of the night. Another night, I experienced the same exact thing, but this time, as I left the room, I heard whispering coming from my cousin's bedroom, which was located right next to the living room. Confused and terrified, I started to wonder if it was my cousin that I'd been babysitting, only to find out later that day he was sleeping with his parents in their room the entire night. I knew I had to dispose of the board, and when I did, I heard a voice later that night say, "I will come back." Eventually, we moved, and I began feeling safe again. The activity still happens from time to time. I realized later that this thing wasn't a part of the house. I summoned it, and it was attached to me. I thought I was losing my mind until one day my older cousin had visited. She is also a believer who'd had her own personal experiences. We were exchanging stories of strange events, and she distinctly said she heard heavy breathing coming from upstairs. We both looked at each other, and she noticed that my dog had turned toward the direction of the stairs, and then she heard it too. She had lived there prior to me and stated that she's never heard that during the time of the residency there. Daniel T. I saw a humanoid, something, in the woods outside my childhood home. This was rural northern Wisconsin, and I was 14. Up until that day, I had zero fear of the woods. I spent most of my time out there exploring and feared nothing. My parents had a lousy marriage and fought a lot, and I felt more at home outside than in the house. On hot nights, I'd even take a sleeping bag and sleep on the roof of an old shack on our property. I saw bears. I saw wolves. They were always more afraid of me than me them. I didn't believe in ghosts, Bigfoot, demons, or even God. I only got lost out there once when dark fell sooner than I'd expected. I stayed calm, found the North Star, and knew that if I continued south, I'd eventually come across the old railroad tracks near my home. Even the thought of spending the night out there didn't bother me. The thought of my mom's rage when I didn't come home did. So it was summer. I'd just turned 14. My mom had left my father. Father worked all the time. Sister was living out on her own. Once school was out, it was me and my cat, and this is before the internet or smartphones. We lived on a dead-end dirt road, and around noon, I took my usual stroll down the long driveway to check the mail. My cat followed me everywhere, and I actually kind of relied on him to give me a heads up if there was a bear or something close by. A bit of movement behind me as I stood at the mailbox made me aware there was something across the road in the trees, but there were pesky deer everywhere. I heard a loud crash then, like something very loudly making its way through the brush. It's like every damned classic horror story. My brain had no capability for the thought of anything paranormal or spooky. I simply tucked the mail under my arm and headed into the woods to investigate. My cat followed close behind. I got about 10 yards in when I noticed what I hadn't noticed before. There was no noise. Nothing. It was a beautiful June day, and yet there wasn't a single bird singing, no insects, no leaves rustling. It was absolutely silent. At the same time I registered the silence, I got that eerie feeling that something was watching me. I stopped immediately and started scanning the woods for deer. Hunters know what I'm talking about when I say you look for the shape of a deer instead of trying to pinpoint them by color. And that's when I spotted it. Two brown furry legs, the top of it concealed by tree branches. I went to side with relief when my cat hissed. I looked down and he was completely poofed out with his back arched, looking at the same thing I was. I looked back up and the legs moved. Not like a deer, like a human. Everything happened at once after that. I dropped the mail, picked up the cat by the scruff of the neck, and ran for it. Whatever was out there with me was running after us. I've never run so fast in my life. I tore up the driveway, into the house, locked the door, and grabbed the phone. I called my next-door neighbor, who was the ex-chief of police, and he came over immediately with his pistol. He checked out the spot I'd been in, found nothing. I was so hysterical I was in tears. He stayed with me until I was able to reach my mom and have her come and get me. Of course, they thought I was completely high or delusional. I know exactly what I saw and felt. It was broad daylight. I never felt safe in those woods again and stopped sleeping outside. Anonymous. Shadow person. I don't expect anyone to believe this, and I don't blame you if you don't. Sometimes I'm not sure I believe it myself. Regardless, it is 100% true. I was driving in the woods years ago. It was a pretty familiar area. To this day, I can drive to the exact spot it happened. It was summer, and I drive a convertible, so the top was down. Maybe somewhere around 2 a.m.-ish. It was a very clear night, but it had stormed earlier. Not really relevant, just trying to give as much detail as I can. On the horizon of the right side of my car, I saw flashes of amber light in the distance. At first, I thought it was an emergency vehicle, but I know the area well, and there was no road where the lights were coming from. Nothing but woods for miles, in fact. I almost crashed the car trying to figure out the lights. There was a tree down in the road from the storm earlier that I almost hit. I had to stop the car and turn around. That's a two-lane road with no lights nearby whatsoever. Nothing but starlight and my headlights. As I turned my car around in the middle of the road, my headlights land on this thing, I guess. Whatever it is, it was 8 feet tall at least. At least, that's my best guess. It was much taller than me at 6 feet. I stopped the car. Why I did so, I couldn't tell you. I don't know myself. But I did, and I shut the lights off. And this thing, it was definitely humanoid, and definitely not human, had some sort of luminescence about it. Its skin glowed a dull white light. The thing started to move toward the car and was making terrible noises. Hoarse, moaning noises. That's the best way I can describe the sound it made. As it got closer, I could make out its features. Now, I wear glasses. My prescription's very outdated. I know, bad idea driving at night like that, but anyway. Again, it was very tall and very, very thin. I remember thinking, if it was human, it would have starved to death long ago. Its arms were out of proportion, as was its neck. They were abnormally long. Its arms were nearly to its knees. It had wrinkled, worn, leathery-looking skin, which was the purest white I'd ever seen. The wrinkles of its skin made it look impossibly old. It folded over itself and over again. The best way to describe it would be looking like some kind of combination of maggot, birch bark, and wet newspaper. Like if you cut your finger and wear a bandage way too long and you take the bandage off and the skin is sickly white and wrinkled. Like that, but everywhere. The closer it got, I could see more. Its eyes, or apparent lack thereof, they just looked like large, deep, dark holes. Its mouth was crooked and way too wide. If it had ears, the corners of the mouth would be right up to them. This moaning, limping, shuffling thing came too close for comfort finally, and I'd seen enough. I started my car and took the Nope train right out of there. I drove 90 miles an hour all the way home. In hindsight, I regret leaving. I had the strong impression, after the fact, that the thing was injured or sick or even dying. It did not look well, and whatever it was, I think perhaps it only wanted help. In hindsight, I hoped it had found help or had at least come to a swift end, as it was obviously suffering. A little bit of background. This was in southwest Michigan, and myself, I've been employed in the past as a paramilitary contractor, which means I had plenty of psych evaluations that are mandatory for the job. I'm perfectly sane except for chronic insomnia. I absolutely do not do drugs other than cigarettes and the very occasional beer. Anyway, this is my story. Like I said, I don't expect you to believe it, but it is the honest truth. I guess I really just want to know what this thing was. If anyone has seen anything similar, hell, it's been a few years, and it's one of those stories you tell when the subject of high strangeness comes up. Anonymous. I came across Bigfoot, deep in the forest. I was hiking up in the Cascades in Oregon. I was in a more remote area of the range. On the 6th or 7th day on the trail, the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. I chalked it up to being a mountain lion in the area, but the weird thing was the uneasy feeling never left. That night is when I heard the howling. It wasn't wolves or bears or any of the other animals I'd ever heard. The closest thing I could relate it to is the noises apes and monkeys make. This persisted for the next few nights. Eventually things started rummaging through my campsite. Naturally, I assumed it was a bear or raccoons. But then on the 11th day, I woke up and my food bag was removed from the trees. Something had cut the line through. All my food was gone. I decided to keep pushing. I had 4 days left till the end of the trail. I'm familiar with what I can and can't eat in the area, and I could always fish for food. The same nightly activities occurred, and on the 13th night, something started throwing rocks at my tent. For some reason, I lost it. I screamed in the darkness for whatever it was to leave me alone, hoping it was just some person fucking with me and maybe they'd scream out, "Sorry, mate," or something. Instead, it grew quiet for the first time in nights. Nothing could be heard. Then a scream, more louder and vicious than before, cut through the night. Then nothing, complete and utter silence again. Despite it being quiet, I wasn't able to sleep that night. I just waited. The next day, I continued my hike, dead tired, just wanting to get out. The hair on the back of my neck still standing, the forest still quiet, I felt like I was being hunted. Towards the end of the day, I had sat down to rest before pushing a few more miles when I saw it. Something tall and large, bigger than any man or animal I'd seen, sliding through the forest, not making a noise. I yelled at it, and it turned to look at me. I never got a good look at it through the trees and the brush, and it was dark, but I knew that whatever it was causing this. I threw a rock at it and then pulled my knife. This thing just kept staring at me. I don't know what kicked in, but I no longer felt scared. I felt angry, and I ran at the thing. It ran from me, and I chased it in the woods. It had long strides and easily outpaced me, but I continued the chase. After several minutes, I gave up and collapsed in exhaustion. I rested for a bit before backtracking my way to my backpack and resting area. I was tired and made camp there. Another night of silence when I woke up the next day. I only had about 10 miles to go until I was out. Exhausted, hungry, and mentally drained, I made my way out. As I got closer and closer to the end of the trail, the typical forest noises returned. Birds, mice running through the undergrowth, all these noises slowly returned. I no longer had this feeling of unease. I got to trail's end, sat in my car, and cried. To this day, I still pass it off as someone just fucking with me, but the way that thing moved in the forest, I just don't know. I told a park ranger about it, and he jokingly said they have a bunch of Bigfoot sightings in the area, but most likely it was a local fucking with me or my own imagination. I do a lot of long hikes, but that 15 days was by far the worst. Signed, C.E. A hunter's experience. Thank you for letting me tell my stories. It means a lot. I'm a hunter from Ohio and own a small piece of land. We have everything from skinwalkers to UFOs on this land. It started when I was 8 years old. My dad and uncle were away from the trailer, and I was alone by the fire pit, playing with my flashlight and having a fun time. Then I saw it. It had to be 6 feet tall and very hairy and skinny. It was bipedal and had horns on its head like an 8-point. It leapt on all fours and ran off. The next story, I was 16, and my dad's friend, and myself were on a four-wheeler when my dad's friend said, "What the hell is that?" It was a small, round orange ball floating at treetop level, moving in a slow circle. When we would get close, it would go out, but when we moved away, it would come back. We watched this for 10 minutes until it floated off. My third story is one I don't tell many people because it still scares me. It was in December. I was 20 at the time, and it was close to dark, and the woods were active all day. There were birds chirping, and I saw plenty of small deer during the day, but I got out of the tree stand, and I remembered it going dead quiet. So I started walking, and it's a mile from my tree to the trailer, but I felt like I was being watched and followed. I started to hear a goat noise. None of my neighbors owned goats. So now I have my gun cocked, and I hear a horrible screech and something heavy running at me. I fired in the direction and ran. I ended up running into my dad, yelling, "Run," and we booked it. The final story I don't tell people, but it's time people know. It was a year after the last story. I'm 21. Now, I think this needs some backstory to it. The scary stuff hasn't been this bad ever until over the 2018 summer, where a satanic cult came into my neighbor's farm sacrificing his cows, and the woods feel different. I mean, you don't go there without something. It got to the point where you have to know where everyone is at all times. It was bow season, late September. I got out of my tree stand because I moved fields and because I wanted a new spot. But the tree was exposed so they could see me. I get on the ground and see lots of deer. It was getting dark, and my dad headed back to the trailer early to pack up our gear. But he called me and said, "Hey, head back, it's getting dark." I said, "Okay," and hung up and started walking and got to the end of the field. And I heard my dad's voice, clear as day, say, "Hey, wait for me." And I stopped, but then I remembered he was at the trailer, and I ran. I heard it behind me yelling, "Wait for me, stop running," deeper and darker. I made it back, but I didn't hunt for a while after that. Sincerely, Anonymous. I knew I wasn't alone. I've not yet written these experiences down, but thought it'd be a cool idea to send them your way, because I really enjoy your narration. Feel free to use this any way you see fit. My name is Elizabeth. In May of 2019, I moved into a very fancy loft apartment at a brand new, large, expensive luxury complex in uptown Charlotte, North Carolina. Because of the weird things that occurred in that space, I ended up moving out early and having to pay rent at 2 locations, but it was worth it. The activity did not begin immediately. I don't even remember when it started happening. I never felt any weird vibes in that loft until one night, after probably months of nothing strange, when I was sitting on the toilet. It was after 2 a.m. and I had to pee. I fumbled into the bathroom and sat on the toilet. My brain went from half asleep to completely awake, when all of a sudden the door to my bedroom slowly closed with a moan and a click. As soon as I heard that click, I knew I was not alone. I never put real effort into contacting whomever was sharing that loft with me, because I didn't want to increase the activity, as I live alone and deal with this territory daily for work-related cases. Instead, I decided to take the opportunity to see if I could calm my nerves better and handle anything that occurred with a level head. which is generally much easier at work because the issues are not in my home. It mostly worked until the big dude showed up. The most intense thing I saw, literally visually, was an explosion of orbs that danced like a fish in my living room, and a super fast shadow person. The main door to my loft bedroom was a barn door style set of frosted glass doors. I heard something in the kitchen sink crash. That was their favorite way to get my attention, by knocking things into the sink, and looked up. I saw a dark shadow of a child-sized person run past the glass door so quickly it was obviously paranormal. I said hello, asked them to please be quiet, and eventually went to sleep. The most startling thing that happened to me was being woken up from just having fallen asleep by someone blowing cold air fairly aggressively into my face. A pattern of sleep deprivation began forming, and soon I swear they were messing with the fire alarm. Oh my God, that alone is half the reason why I left early. I think the local fire alarm went off at least 50 times. At least. It was a nightmare. The maintenance staff would claim dead batteries or that the alarm went offline or needed to be restarted every time. But after several dead batteries and resets, they began to get spooked as well. Those awful alarms were set off at all hours, and several times the building alarm in my unit went off, but none of the other units did. The coolest things that ever happened were capturing several EVPs accidentally. I actually caught an EVP of my stepmother who passed away in 2015 saying my nickname and her own name. She took the time to identify herself, and that meant a whole lot to me. I've wished more than once that I'd put real effort into capturing more, but I did not want to encourage what was slowly turning into vaguely threatening vibes. One night, I fell asleep on the couch and woke up because I felt someone shake the entire couch, but was so groggy that the event was too hazy to be as scary as it could have been. Another night, I was watching TV on the couch and heard a very large person walk into my hallway and right up to me. I felt every hair on my body alert into vertical position and knew this was a different spirit. Male, large, and possibly drunk, because the electrified air around me reeked very strongly of grain alcohol. These apartments were not even finished opening entirely when I first moved in, but that entire complex was loaded with bad juju. After watching a freaking portal open up in the middle of a Hansa tapestry I had hanging from the large wall in front of my bed, and after constantly being woken up by negative feelings, I finally confessed what was happening to my boyfriend. Note, I do not know if it was an actual portal, but a circular or spherical mass of vibrating electricity or something began swirling and flowing slowly at first. Then as my heart rate increased, it spun faster and faster. The air began to smell like how my plasma cleaner smells when I clean water. I kind of felt like I was drowning, or maybe tapping into someone who was drowning, or maybe portals feel like drowning. I did not understand that aspect at all. Currently, my boyfriend and I live together in a totally different place, but he was planning on joining me at that cursed, overpriced uptown luxury apartment. He has pretty impressive ESP, and I do not know what exactly went through his head other than a hearty "fuck that" after I slowly confessed to everything that had been going on. But we found a new place and moved 4 months before my lease was up. It took less than a week. Now, here's the seriously crazy part. While we were moving out of Uptown, my boyfriend met the movers to get the larger furniture properly placed and delivered to our new place. When they were in the bedroom breaking down the mattress and box springs, he saw a strange pile of rocks, a pile of ashes, and 3 strange-looking handmade paper or wax candles, 2 of which had been burned through the whole wick, one of which was unlit. He was so taken aback by the creepiness and strangeness of the scene that he grabbed the rocks and candles and dumped them into the trash. When I asked why, he said it looked like someone had been doing voodoo under my bed, and he instinctively thought to get rid of it. Unfortunately, he threw most of the little altar or whatever it was down the trash chute before the movers spotted it, but he did end up saving the unlit candle, and the pile of ashes was still there when I went to go look. We could not figure out how anyone other than a child managed to get a fairly intricate arrangement of objects under the big bed directly in the middle of the floor, beneath the middle of the bed, because it's a queen-size box bed with only 5 inches of space underneath. Also, the altar was placed about 3.5 feet from the edge of the mattress under the bed. Neither of us could reach that far, and there was not enough space to fit your head or shoulders under far enough to reach the center and arrange an altar with lit candles. We've tried to figure out who could have accessed our very high-security, chip-access-only apartment door, let alone all the locked doors and security measures before that one. If any of you listeners have any ideas about what that stuff under my bed was, we're still scratching our heads over it. I didn't live there or interact with the neighbors or staff there long enough to make friends or enemies, and the only people who can access all those doors are the staff. The management of that uptown apartment was, and remains, absolutely terrible, but the staff never gave me any indication that they were intelligent enough or able to put down their phones and focus long enough to actually learn a complex spiritual topic. And I don't think anyone who worked there would bother doing something like that to risk their jobs during a pandemic. It remains a big WTF, and both my boyfriend and I feel it is related to the activity somehow. But how? North Carolina is one haunted place. Thank you for reading this, and also thank you for the other great stories and narrations. Cheers, Elizabeth. My humanoid encounter. I recently watched the video Encounters with Transparent Humanoids on your channel, and it was an eerie reminder of an experience I had about 3 years ago. The fact that someone had seen something similar to what I witnessed raised an eyebrow. I actually put it off to my brain playing tricks on me, perhaps from Matrix of Bush, Shadow and Trees. It did look odd enough to catch my attention for further inspection and watch it for about 5 minutes or so. Here's the story. It was morning, the sun was up in the sky, early fall, a light breeze blowing, moving the sparsely scattered brush in the area. That is one thing that really grabbed me. As I mentioned, I watched it, and the brush moving seemed to have no effect on the position of the apparition. It remained the same, except when it appeared to move an arm and slight movement of what would be the head. It looked like a very light outline of a man. You could detect the shadow of eyes and features of the face. It stood there just looking not in my direction, but more of a direction perpendicular to the position it was standing. More or less straight ahead with a slight occasional movement in an opposite direction to me, perhaps about 20 to 25 degrees. I saw about 2/3 of the object from head to a little below the waist. Some light brush covered the rest. I watched it and couldn't believe my eyes, and tried my best to explain it with no logical explanation, as it's my nature to ask questions and rule out all the possible explanations. It was a very light outline that looked like the interior was a distortion. That is what caught my eye. I had to go to another room and answer the phone. When I came back, it was gone, or I could not see it anymore. I have no idea what it was. It was weird. Maybe just some things were in the right position and me in the right position. Who knows? It was weird, and even weirder to know that others have had the same experience. I can say this apparition and the light breeze blowing that day with no sound was an eerie feeling. I don't talk about it because I can't explain it, and as I mentioned, I need proof and don't accept everything heard or seen. There aren't many times explanations, but I will say this as the ghost in the Christmas Carol told old Scrooge, "Do you not trust your own senses?" A comment from a fictional story, but a legitimate question to ask. Take care, Sammy Henson. It moved with purpose and intelligence. I've been listening to your channel for a while now, trying to find answers and understand an experience I had about 6 months ago, just outside of my hometown in a pretty large forested area here in Ireland. I guess I'll dive right into what happened and not bore you with unimportant details. I was hiking on a trail I'm very familiar with, and because I thought it was going to lash rain, I decided to leave the trail and cut through the woods. I wanted to try and get to my car before downpour, and I knew this area like the back of my hand, or at least I should have, and believed I did. Before I knew it, I felt very strange, disoriented, and nothing looked familiar. I'm not sure if the woods seemed silent before or after I felt this way, but I became undeniably aware of how silent and eerie everything was. Oppressingly, downright suffocating silence, and my heart began to pound as I stood in place, and it felt as if the woods were spinning and closing in around me, like I'd stepped into something I could not comprehend. It was then I noticed something about 15 feet in front of me. It was 10 feet high and about 8 feet wide and distorted. It was like something was bending the light and moving towards me like a fogged up mirror almost, but with no definitive shape. But it was moving with purpose and intelligence and would be completely invisible if not for the distortion within and me looking directly at it. I turned to run and realized another one was behind me, same size and shapeless almost. It was then I realized there were at least 4 of these things closing in on me, and I was trapped and almost paralyzed with fear. What I was seeing my brain could not make sense of, and I was in utter panic and shock and backed up against a tree because I was terrified to run in the direction of these things. I curled up in a fetal position and put my hands over my ears because they'd begun ringing, and the sound was deafening. So I closed my eyes as these intelligent, bizarre things were all around me, about 5 feet exactly. I saw a white flash, like what happens if you're ever hit hard in the head or fell or punched. That's the best I can describe it. My ears were ringing, and then the flash, and then nothing. I woke up to rain falling on me, and hours had passed. I realized this after checking my watch. Everything was normal now, and I knew where I was. I gathered myself, checked for injuries, and realized I was completely fine, and shakingly, I left the woods and drove home. I felt weak and a little clumsy on my feet, but I was okay. I can't make sense of what happened. I've Googled similar events, but found nothing quite like what happened to me, and I really need answers. I stumbled across stealth cloaking technologies used by the military while trying to find answers, and the technology is primitive compared to what I witnessed. What these beings or things were, I just don't know. I don't have answers, and I don't know what happened to me or why. If anyone has experienced anything similar, please share with me, and I'd love to hear anyone's opinions or theories. I grew up in this area and jogged there a few times a week for the past few years, but I haven't gone back since the incident. I have no health issues, and I attended my doctors after the incident to rule out anything sinister with my health, but everything health-wise is fine. One thing that did stand out was the ringing sound that pierced through the silence of the forest right before these beings appeared, and it felt like my brain was actually sizzling in my skull. That and the smell of sulfur or something metallic actually frightened me to the point I thought my brain was bleeding or about to explode. I have no explanation for what happened, and I know in my heart what I saw was truly bizarre and not normal. They moved with purpose and intelligence, and I felt completely at their mercy while they surrounded me in that woodland. I lost almost 4 hours and have no memory of what happened during that time, as if I just passed out or something more sinister occurred. I'm starting to accept I might never have answers, and I'm trying to move on with my life, but it really shook me and my belief system upside down, and I view the world very differently ever since it happened. Your friend, Darren. Have you ever seen an invisible man? A longtime friend of mine, very traditional, totally straight when it came to substances, stopped by my place of business one day and asked me, "Have you ever seen an invisible man?" I gave her the look she expected, and she said, "No, I'm serious." She'd been walking the shore at Potawatomi, Rhode Island, and suddenly she saw a human form, or outline, maybe 30 yards away. It was bent down looking at something in the water. As she stepped closer, he suddenly stood up. From his profile, she could tell he was looking at her. This unnerved her, so she turned around and casually walked away without looking back, perhaps to make him wonder if she had seen him after all. This happened about 10 years after the first Predator movie, but I'm pretty sure this woman had not even seen it. The print ad for it would have kept her away. I told her there was a movie about invisible beings and that a common acquaintance in town had also had experience with one. I kept my eyes open after that. The woman was utterly reliable. If she saw it, it was there. Sincerely, Al Fontana. Little people in the mountains. My father was and still is an avid hunter. He's heard all kinds of tales through the years of what others have seen while hunting. He said he has never seen anything but had only one weird experience when he was around 17 years old. He was hunting for elk with his father and brothers in Salmon, Idaho in 1965. They had all split up to chase down an elk herd they spooked by chance, and my dad was sent around the mountain by himself to cut them off. It was a mildly warm day, and he stopped to rest in the shade of some large boulders to strip off some of his gear and have a drink of water. When he sat down to rest, he felt a rock zip right by his head. Thinking it was one of his brothers playing a trick on him, he yelled at them to stop. That's when he noticed tiny footprints in the soft dust under his feet. And again, another rock was thrown in his direction, closer this time. Now, my dad had always been told about the little people who lived in the rocks and crevices of mountains and hills, an ancient band of Native Americans who barely escaped from the white man. They made their home in the hills, and if you bothered them, they would put a curse on you if you failed to heed their warnings. Feeling a chill creep up his spine, he slowly rose, gathered his things, and said in very slow Shoshone, "I'm leaving. I'm sorry I disturbed you." As he was walking away downhill, he heard small feet slapping the rocks behind him, but being a tad afraid, he never looked back. He never told his father or brothers, and could hardly tell me for fear of me thinking he was crazy. I believe him. Take care, Alex. Blue Shadow People. I have recurring visitations from a life form that I call the Blue People. They don't really look like humans, though. They're about 4 feet tall. They walk erect on legs, but the knees bend backward. They have 4 fingers and 2 thumbs, and roughly the same configuration on their feet. Toes and fingers are webbed. They have no shoulders and no neck. They just go up from the shoulders into a bulbous head. The face consists of 3 crescents that are arched down like a grimace, the shortest on top and the longest at the bottom. They are blue. They have visited me for about 5 years now, to my knowledge. They come late at night when everything is quiet. The first thing, and the thing that wakes me up, is a high-pitched whine. That is followed by a white light that appears through the wall, door, or wherever they choose to enter from. They come in through the light when it opens enough for them to pass. I was quite scared at first and thought that I was having a lucid nightmare. Later, though, when they returned several times, I realized that they were benevolent and only curious about this world. They would walk about my room, look at things, and try to touch things. For a long time, when I tried to speak to them, they would rush back into the light and disappear. I tried everything to set up some kind of communication. Only recently did I have a breakthrough of sorts. When I opened my mouth to speak, one of them rushed over and put his hand on my mouth. I got quiet, and it touched my eyes and then touched my ears. Then it touched the 3 crescents on its face, touched my eyes and ears again. One thing I must interject is that they have no physical form here. I mean, they're kind of like ghosts, so when I say they touched me, it wasn't like really being touched. It took me a while to put it all together, but I have done so, and the message is that they see with sound. My voice blinded them and scared them. It may have even injured them. I think that they are dimensional explorers, and I like to think that they would like to communicate. I'm working on different approaches to doing that. Thanks, signed David. Shadow People and the Ouija board. I'm pretty sure the shadow people are demons. One night, I was having a party, and I'd just gotten a Ouija board for my birthday. Everyone talked me into using it, so we started playing. Then weird stuff started happening. Shadow figures started to appear in my room. A lot of shadow people. It wasn't any of our shadows. These were different. Some had red eyes. Then red orbs started coming through my room. We had made a protective circle, and we all tried to stay in it. It got really cold in my room, and we could all see our breath. If some of my friends couldn't see the shadow people, they could feel them. There was an all-out evil feeling in the room. We all got too freaked out to move. We were just like, whoa. Then one of the shadow people changed. They got all scary looking. I could explain, but I don't want to go into that much detail. Let's just say Pumpkinhead, the demon guy from scary movies. No, his head's not a pumpkin. So we screamed and finally ran out of the room. My parents thought we were crazy. That night, when we went to bed, our closets were glowing red and orbs were going through my room. We didn't go to sleep until like 5 a.m., and even then we only slept not even 4 hours. That was freaky, and stuff didn't die down for a while after that. That was the last time I used the Ouija board. I threw it somewhere deep down in one of my closets. Now I've only used the psychic circle, and even that has consequences. I'm not allowed to use it anymore because of what happened to me, my friend, and my mom, but that is another story for another time. Thank you for sharing. Signed, Amanda. Cloaked humanoid. Recently, I heard a story about an invisible figure in a tree on this channel. The woman recalls the incident as a child and another encounter as an adult. It has encouraged me to tell my story. When I was a teenager, I lived in the Appalachian Mountains in Maryland. One summer, late in the evening, I was sitting in the backyard. I loved spending time outside, and our yard sat on the edge of the woods in a valley. The forest went on as far as the eye could see, an ocean of green treetops that seemed to just go on forever. The yard was bordered by a 4-foot-tall wood plank fence. It was dusk, and the sky was barely lit by the sun, partially blue but fading into the black of the night sky. The stars weren't yet visible, and I was sitting in the grass, enjoying the cool, dry air that evening. It was very peaceful. Then, to my right, about 100+ yards away, the treetops started moving and swaying. Like a wave, from right to my left, the treetops popped and cracked, swaying and moving like as if something big was moving through them. I stood up in the middle of the backyard. The ground was uneven and sloped downhill. I watched and I was confused because the wind wasn't blowing. And suddenly, there was no other sounds. Everything went silent, except for the thing moving through the trees. There was a massive tree right on the edge of our yard, 50 to 60 feet tall. An old, massive tree. The trunk was so big around it would take 4 adults to hug it hand to hand all the way around. The movement stopped there abruptly. I raised my head slowly and looked up. About 30 to 40 feet up in the huge tree, there was a gap in the long, thick branches, and it looked like someone or something was perched on a branch in the gap, looking down at me. It was like the woman described in her encounter. It wasn't completely invisible, because you could see its shape, and it resembled what heat looks like coming off a hot road, but humanoid. I hadn't realized it, but my instincts had kicked in, and I was slowly backing up towards the house, trying not to panic or run. I was dead quiet. I was sort of in a trance, staring at this thing. My eyes locked on it, and it was locked on me. I didn't want to lose sight of it, in case it came after me. As I got to the deck on the back of the house, I stepped into pebbles that were all around the base of the deck. They crunched loudly under my feet, and they broke the silence. The figure stood up quickly, as if it was going to jump down and come after me. I ran up the steps of the tall deck, almost floating as I hurried up, still watching the figure. I went into the house and locked the door. Never looking away, I watched from the window of the kitchen door. It just stood there, staring back at me. The hair on my arms and on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel it watching me. It must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It looked big in the tree, and even as far as I was from it, I could see it clearly in the tree. It was like once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I could feel my heart beat in my throat and my ears started ringing. I didn't want to look away. I could not think clearly on what this thing could be. I'd never seen anything like it. It made small movements, fidgeting, as if it were adjusting its position on the branch. It looked like the lady said, cloaked. It blended into its surroundings, but you could see its silhouette, a hazy outline. The sun was almost completely gone now, and as the darkness of night took the last of the visibility, the massive tree shook suddenly and violently. The tree line moved again. Where's it going? I thought, hoping it wasn't making its way around the house. It seemed to be going back into the woods. Just as quickly as it was there, it was gone. I don't really know how much time went by, but everything seemed like it happened in slow motion and fast at the same time. It felt like an eternity as it happened, but it ended in the blink of an eye. I didn't go back outside into the woods by myself, especially close to dusk. I was and continue to be very hesitant to go out into any forest with creatures or beings like that, or who knows what else is out there waiting. I was 15 years old then. I'm 35 now. I've never told anyone because I know it sounds crazy. How could it be true? This is the kind of thing you only see in movies or read about in fiction books. So imagine my fear and surprise watching any of the Predator movies. I held it in and kept it in, never telling anyone of what had happened to me. Just remembering it makes me feel uneasy. A side note, I never heard if it made a clicking sound because I was inside so quickly, so I can't say if it shared that quality as the creature did in the woman's encounter. I never saw it again, but continue to be cautious. I always look up, checking for any movement or sounds in the trees whenever I go out walking. I can't shake the feeling that I will see it again someday, and hearing the lady's second encounter so many years later as an adult makes me worry for if or when I do cross paths with the invisible creature again. I remember that evening very vividly and clear. I didn't and don't do drugs, didn't drink, I was a kid, and I wasn't asleep or hallucinating. I remember it exactly. You can't forget something like that. I guess the most unnerving thing about it is not knowing its intent. Why was it there? What did it want? Was it lost? Was it just curious? Was it hungry? I guess I'll never know. I'm pretty sure I don't want to find out either. Thanks for your time and giving me a chance to share my story. I hope someone else out there will hear this and be inspired to share their experiences. You are not alone. Thank you. Signed, Anonymous. And now, as promised, here's that very creepy bonus story I was telling you about. It's not from a subscriber, but rather a true account I found on a subreddit. I reached out to the Redditor of the original post, who goes by the name Mungie, and he graciously gave me permission to give his true encounter involving a stickman entity. He writes, so this experience occurred in the summer of 2016. Honestly, I'm not sure what month. This happened in Minnesota. This is my first time telling this story to anyone. I haven't talked about it with anybody other than my then fiancée, who is now my wife, as we were on a walk together when it occurred. Summer of 2016, I was interning at a church in the small city of Mound, Minnesota. The city is out on Lake Minnetonka, basically. Sometimes my wife would ride out with me if I needed to pick something up or get something done. This particular evening, I had to do something at the church quick, so we ran out there. Afterwards, we decided to go on a walk. Now, I don't remember exactly the road we were on, but I do vaguely. It was between the church and by Dutch Lake, I'm fairly sure. We parked and got out of the car. There weren't many houses on this road. There was an older farmhouse with a barn up ahead of where we parked, and then what looked like a couple of long driveways. The time was somewhere between 7:30 and 9 p.m. We locked the car and started walking and talking. After about 3 minutes or so, we're almost up to the farmhouse. This is where my wife saw something. In the middle of a sentence, she stopped, and I took a couple steps ahead. Then she asked me if I saw that, with urgency. I turned my head to the yard in front of the farmhouse. What I saw was a stick figure-looking thing. It was about 2 feet tall, with arms and legs about a foot long each. No features at all. It was a cloudy black color and was striding across the yard smoothly. It started on the ground from where I saw it, and as it went, it gradually rose to be about 1 to 2 feet off the ground, still striding in the air. Then it just disappeared in front of our eyes, as if it went through a portal or something like that. In talking later on, we figured from where she first spotted it, it traveled 50 feet or so, give or take. As soon as it disappeared, I told her we needed to get out of here. We felt this overwhelming sense of fear overcome us. We booked it to the car. I whipped a U-turn and we got out of there as fast as we could. We sat in silence for a good long time before we talked about what we saw on the way home. I know the land around Lake Minnetonka and the lake itself has been inhabited for thousands of years by mound builders, and then later on by the Midawakaton tribe, who are a sub-tribe of the Asante Dakota, so maybe this thing we saw has relation to these peoples. I'm not sure, honestly. If anybody has any info or theories as to what we saw or what it could be, I would love to hear them. Predator deer. A few years ago, while walking down a path in the woods in southern Missouri, I saw a predator deer. It was the perfect outline of a 10 to 12 point buck, but I could see through it. I could see the rest of the trail, trees, this little trail sign that was further down the path, but it was distorted like rippling water or shimmering. It looked like the Predator special effects in the movie. The deer took 2 steps on the trail, stopped, turned its head to look in my direction, licked its ears, and then turned its head back around and walked off the other side of the trail into a thick snuggle of bushes. It was maybe 20 feet away. I got a really good look, and I know exactly what I saw. It was bizarre. I ran to those bushes and that spot in the trail. There weren't any good prints, no broken branches, nothing out of place. So strange. Anonymous. Strange Australian occurrences. I live in Australia, grew up in New South Wales, and myself and my family have experienced some strange occurrences in the bush. In the 1990s, we would go fishing at 4 a.m. most mornings on the holidays. Dad would drive the 4-wheel drive miles and miles up winding bush tracks and ride onto the beach. I always felt uneasy driving through there, always worried that we'd get lost or the car would break down. It was beautiful and serene, but also isolated and eerie. I'd usually get bored after an hour or so of fishing, and I'd go for a swim as the sun came up, and then nap in the car until it was time to go home a few hours later. One morning, when I was about 14, I took a disposable camera with me and decided to venture off the beach and down to explore the bush. I walked a few minutes down the track and took some photos of pretty trees. I heard a rustling in the dense scrub, but put it down to wildlife, possibly a kangaroo. The further I walked, the more uneasy I felt. I had a feeling of being watched. I knew that a local tribe frequented the area, as they would sometimes walk naked out of the bush to go for a swim as the sun was rising too. I assumed that maybe they were who was watching me. I pushed past my fear and walked further into the bush. I kept hearing rustling all around, but when I'd look to one area, I'd immediately hear it on the opposite side of the track. I was searching back and forth and all around and becoming more and more uneasy. I suddenly realized that I could not hear the pounding waves or birds or insects anymore. There was deafening silence, and I suddenly heard a creaking noise, and every fiber of my being wanted to run. And run I did, as fast as I could, barefoot down the bush tracks, straight back to the beach. I never turned around once I ran, but I had a feeling that something was behind me. In the 70s, Dad was camping and saw strange lights. They were close to the ground, so he thought a vehicle might have been driving around lost. He watched the lights moving closer, but realized that they were getting higher and higher and soon were hovering in the sky and moving slowly in different directions. Eventually the lights went away, but he says they hung around at least half an hour. I recall having a similar incident driving in the car with my mom late at night during the 1980s. We were the only car on the road and saw a light coming out behind our car. Mom thought maybe one headlight was out on a car behind us. The light got closer, and I remember Mom saying, "Put your head down." I was a curious kid, so of course I looked out the window. There was no car, just a light traveling in line with our car right next to my window. I don't remember how long it was there or how it disappeared. Mom was very unsettled, and to this day hates driving country roads or driving at night. I've heard similar things from uncles and friends, and since found out that phenomena is referred to as min-min lights. Thanks, signed Amy. Hatman Encounters. I'm sorry if this is kind of long. This story, though told secondhand, is one that is so familiar to me, it is as if I were telling of a first-hand experience. I was married to the man who experienced the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard. When I was 19, I married a man much older than me, and through that decision became blessed with the most wonderful family. Although, after 12 years, the marriage failed, I still love and remain in contact with much of his family. The person I was closest to was his mother, Goldie, God rest her soul. She was in her 70s at the time, and we quickly developed a mother-daughter relationship I'd never had but always wanted. I was fascinated with her personal history and growing up years in the Appalachian Mountains in a tiny place unofficially called Frogtown on the outskirts of Bramwell, West Virginia. She told wonderful stories of her childhood, growing up during the Depression. I don't know that this has anything to do with the story to come, but several people died in the old farmhouse where Goldie was born and raised. The house was built only a few short years before Goldie's father bought it as a home for himself and his second wife after having lost his first wife to childbirth. This house was built with matching porches, one on the first story and one above it on the second, spanning the width of the front of the house. In its day, it was a splendid home. As it was told to me, the original owner lost his 2-year-old daughter and only child after a fall from the second-story porch. The mother fairly lost her mind, and the house was sold immediately. The next death was Goldie's 2-year-old brother, Vernon, who died of croup in his crib while the town doctor was assisting their mother in childbirth in the adjacent bedroom. This loss was devastating to Goldie's mother. I can't imagine the mixed emotions. Blessing upon tragedy. Then her father died of pneumonia in the late 1940s. Then, in the early 70s, after all but Aunt Mildred had moved away from home, her other older brother, Virgil, died in the main floor kitchen after having drank himself to death. He had battled with alcoholism most of his adult life. Years later, Granny Garrison died in her bedroom after a long bout with cancer. So, a lot of people breathed their last in that old house, but I digress. So we fast forward a few decades. Goldie is married and divorced with 4 grown children of her own and living in Ohio, where all 3 of her sons were policemen. She was a devout Christian woman and hard-working homemaker. By this time, her mother had died 10 years prior, and her sister, who married but never moved out, still lived in the old family home in Frogtown, West Virginia. Aunt Mildred was widowed after her husband, Pete, died of black lung from working in the coal mine. She had 2 young adult daughters in their 20s, Bonnie and Alice, living there with her in the old family home. Though the 3 ladies were all who lived there now, everyone still considered it to be Granny Garrison's, and called it by that name and came home for visits often. This is where my story really begins. Goldie's youngest son, Wayne, who would later be my first husband, was having trouble in a failing relationship as well as problems with an already stressful job. So he decided to take his mom and drive down to Granny Garrison's for a few days to get away. They left Ohio Friday evening after he got off work at the police department, and it was late in the night when they arrived at the dark farmhouse. When Aunt Mildred's husband was still alive, he had installed a utility pole, like a power line pole, set in the front yard with large commercial-style fluorescent lights at the top, which stayed on all night every night, since at this home you would still have to travel to the outhouse in the side yard to answer any calls of nature. Wayne carried their small bags onto the creaking porch as Bonnie met them at the door and let them inside. Bonnie said everyone else was fast asleep and they would see them in the morning. She took Wayne and Goldie into the room they would share in the front southeast corner of the farmhouse. Years later, I stayed in this very room many times without incident. This room used to be a parlor, but the pocket doors which opened to the entry foyer were blocked off with furniture. A fireplace was centered on the east wall with a single bed on the right-hand side and a single bed on the left-hand side. As it was, when Granny Garrison was alive, Mildred and the girls lived entirely upstairs, where there had been 5 bedrooms, one of which had been turned into a kitchen, another into a TV room, and unless they had company, the girls never used the kitchen or any other rooms on the main floor, and company never went upstairs. All my years of visiting this home, I never saw the upstairs until after the girls moved out in 2003, with the old house falling in around them. The main floor kitchen was in the back northeast corner of the house. Granny Garrison's room had been directly to the west, connected to the kitchen. The small parlor, which was now turned into a bedroom with 2 single beds, was where Wayne and Goldie spent that night. No one ever slept in Granny Garrison's bedroom that I know of, even though her bed was made up and the room was there just as she had left it. So, after Bonnie left them to get ready for bed, they took turns visiting the outdoor privy, anxious to settle in after a long 7-hour drive. After their preparation, they settled down into their respective beds. Goldie was to the right of the fireplace with a large window at the foot of her bed that looked out onto the front yard where the pole light illuminated the old lace curtains. Wayne was in the bed to the left of the fireplace with a door to the kitchen just beyond the foot of his bed. As the story was told many times in my presence, they laid there in the dark and made small talk for a while, discussing what they would do tomorrow and who they might want to visit while they were in town. After some time, as we all do without even realizing it, they naturally began to stop talking and drop off to sleep. Wayne said he was in a twilight stage of sleep, where he was just beginning to drift. He said he opened his eyes in what he believed was a subconscious blink, about ready to roll to his side, when he noticed a dark, solid figure standing by his bed, barely illuminated by the dusky glow of the pole lamp coming through the window. His natural reflex was to think someone was in the house who was not supposed to be there, and his mind immediately went to his service revolver, which he had placed on the nightstand beside his bed. He said he believed he involuntarily yelled the moment the man was spotted, but he said before he could even reach for the gun, he was held down. He had no idea how, but he said he couldn't move his arms, and he saw this man was working over him with hands moving so fast from side to side that he couldn't feel the man's hands on him. However, he also noted that with the black cloak this man was wearing, he could not see his hands, just long sleeves that came down past where his hands should be. He also said the man was wearing a black hat with a wide brim. It was not a stovepipe hat. It was a bandolero-style hat. He likened it to the hat Zorro wore in his TV adventure series. But unlike Zorro's hat, the brim came down in a way that his face could not be seen. Wayne was yelling and kicking with his legs to fight back. He said it lasted only seconds, and the figure was gone. It was at this time he realized his mom was saying, "Wayne, I'm sorry. It's okay. It's okay." Wayne was trying to catch his breath and said, "What do you mean you're sorry?" "I had a nightmare and screamed and it scared you. It's my fault. I'm sorry," his mom said breathlessly. Wayne quickly asked, "What was your nightmare?" Goldie, probably scared out of her mind, didn't want to talk about it and kept saying it didn't matter. It took about 3 times asking and Wayne's impatience to get her to finally say she dreamed there had been a man in a black cloak standing over Wayne's bed, and that is what made her scream. At this initial moment, she believed it really was a nightmare, and her scream is what had startled Wayne and made him yell out and thrash around. Wayne asked, "Mom, what did he look like?" Again, she said, "Wayne, it doesn't matter." He said, "Mom, this is important. What did he look like?" She said, "I don't know. He was in a long black cloak and was wearing a black hat with a brim that came down over his face." The adrenaline that came with this admission made Wayne want to sit right up in bed. It was then that he realized he was still being held down. He said he began to struggle and said, "Mom, I can't move my arms." Goldie got up from her bed and turned on the lamp to go assist Wayne. Despite his struggling, he was still covered up with the bedspread. When she pulled back the bedspread, they saw that the top sheet had somehow been removed from where it had been tucked into the bed, twisted into a rope-like fashion, in the manner you would twirl a dish towel to playfully snap someone, and the sheet was then completely wrapped around Wayne's upper torso, crisscrossing and pinning his arms to his side. All of this somehow happening while his body remained under the bedspread. Although it takes time to tell a story, you must keep in mind that the actual events from this encounter and the conversation, realizing they saw the same thing and discovering he was tied up, took only moments. After getting Wayne untied and remaking the bed, they were both so shaken it took them hours of talking before they could fall back to sleep, and the two adults did so with the lamp on. However, they both agreed they would tell no one, especially the girls, since they lived there alone. The following morning at breakfast, Bonnie asked if the cats got up in bed with Wayne last night. He said, "No, I don't think so." She said, "We heard you hollering and figured the cats got up in your bed." He said, "No, I had a pretty bad nightmare." Bonnie said, "Your nerves are bad, aren't they?" He answered, "Yep, pretty bad." To which Bonnie replied, "My nerves have been bad too. I've been having to see a psychologist at the school." She was in the process of obtaining her teaching degree from Bluefield Christian College. When Goldie asked what had been troubling her to cause her to get counseling, Bonnie replied, "Well, I've been seeing a man in my room." Wayne said he nearly dropped his fork, but decided to play it off, and he responded to her in a teasing manner, since she was young and unmarried. He raised his eyebrow in a mocking fashion and said, "A man, huh?" in a way that implied Bonnie was dreaming of men. Bonnie, who was shy in nature and sweet as the day is long, turned pink and giggled at his teasing. She said, "No, I come home from school at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I want to lay down and rest before going into work at the local craft store at 4 p.m. So I go up and lay down on my bed, and just as I'm about to fall asleep, there is a man standing beside my bed. It scared me so bad, I jumped off the other side of the bed, and he actually started to move around the bed like he was coming after me." She continued, "I can't figure it out because I know I was awake. How can you see these things when you're awake?" She went on to explain it doesn't happen every day, but has happened about 3 times. She said her mom and Alice heard her screaming, and Aunt Mildred told her to claim the blood of Jesus if it happened again. Bonnie said the next time it happened, she did that very thing, and the man was driven backwards, then went in an upward trajectory through the ceiling and was gone. Wayne said, "Which room is your bedroom?" Bonnie stated it was the one right above where Wayne and Goldie had slept the night before. It was then that Wayne told the girls over the remainder of breakfast what had happened to them the night before. He said there must be a demon attached to the house for some reason. Aunt Mildred said they would have their preacher come to the house as soon as he could and bless the house in hopes it would keep this spirit away. The girls did exactly that, and there have been no more encounters for any of them. I've been in the presence of the telling of this story at various times with all parties present, and at times when they all discussed it amongst themselves. Also want to add that years later, Goldie was in her living room in her Ohio home watching a favorite television evangelist, and they were telling of a recent trip with their prayer group to the Great Wall of China. The wife of the evangelist, who co-hosted the show with him, said as they were praying, she looked to the heavens and saw these dark figures hovering in the sky. She described exactly what Wayne and Goldie saw that night. Long cloaks with sleeves that covered the hands, and black hats with brims that covered the face. She had never before heard of anyone other than herself, Bonnie, and Wayne seeing this entity, and thought it must be a common look for demons. Fast forward a few more years, I'm now in the family. We married in 2000, and Wayne has 3 young adult sons who are all around my age. We all got along wonderfully and spent a lot of time together. One weekend, the oldest son, who worked at what used to be Emory Worldwide at the Dayton airport, would carpool with a man who also went to his church. This man I will call Sid, and his wife had just bought a new home in Piqua, Ohio. He told how their 5-year-old daughter, who never had problems before being afraid of the dark or sleeping in her own room, was refusing to sleep in her own room at this new house. Sid's wife, who was a secretary at their church, had their daughter talking to a Christian counselor who was also a member of their congregation. After a few meetings, the little girl drew a picture and talked to the man who comes in her room at night. He's in a long black cloak and wears a big hat that comes down over his face. Wayne's son had heard his dad tell his story, and he couldn't wait to come tell us what Sid had just confided. We all knew Sid and his family personally. When we heard this, it was as if the air had been sucked from the room. In 2003, the girls moved out of the old family home into a nice cabin closer to town. The house sat empty for about a year until it was burnt down by arson, and the land later sold to a man who manages it for timber. It's amazing to me how much happened in the years one family spent on that little scratch of ground. Goldie and Aunt Mildred are passed away now. I still keep in touch with Bonnie and Alice, who are now in their 70s and still in their cabin, neither of them having ever married. My love to both of them. These are the only stories I've ever heard of anyone having encountered this exact being. Even listening to your various stories by other listeners, I've not heard of anything specifically like this. I don't believe that a handful of people I know personally, other than the TV evangelists, are the only ones in the universe who have experienced this entity. So I'm going to be bold and ask, has anyone else? Can anyone with more experience in the supernatural tell me what this being represents? I'm inclined to believe it must be a common demon form, but that is my own speculation. Although I've always loved the creepy and a good mystery, I'm too afraid to mess with this. I can't even bring myself to Google it, but I'm curious as to other people's experiences. Thank you for letting me take this time to relay this true story. Signed, Anonymous. I went missing. All right, guys, I can't believe I'm actually writing this and can say this. I was almost taken on a Sunday evening about a month back. I'm still trying to piece together what happened. I went into the woods around 3 p.m. Eastern Time on a friend's property that I know like the back of my hand. I entered a thicket and got stuck there for the night. It was so strange. I would normally have just backtracked and walked the logging road out, even in the dark, but for some reason, I honestly can't recall, I thought it better to stay put where I was. Did I mention that it turned to night like someone flipped a switch? It doesn't get dark until around 9 here in the summer, and by my best guesstimate, it couldn't have been much later than 4 o'clock. I can't begin to put in the words how dehydrated and thirsty I was the entire night and into the next day. Just like I don't remember it getting dark, I don't remember it turning back into daylight. The alarming part? I somehow managed to cross 2 paved main roads and get to the very top of a mountain. No longer even remotely close to the property that I went in on. I felt for sure I was hallucinating. When I started to come back around, I found myself kneeling in a creek, drinking so deeply that I swear I almost drowned. And it was late afternoon on Monday. The experience lasted the better part of an entire day. If there's interest, I'll go into the details of what I saw and what I experienced. I lost my glasses, which I'm blind without, my backpack, my shirt, shoes, and socks, as well as my boxers and pants. I stumbled back into my pants, thank the Lord, but I definitely stripped at one point. I don't know if it was dehydration that caused delusions and hallucinations, but it was for sure one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. To top it off, I found my way back to the main road and was carefully making my way back home barefooted when a stranger, whose face I couldn't make out because I didn't have my glasses, slowed down, called me by name, and threw a pair of shoes to me. How he knew that he needed to keep a spare pair in his truck, I have no idea. I don't know how he knew my name either. I've included pictures of my legs and feet to lend some credibility to myself. I was torn to shreds because I undoubtedly walked miles through the woods barefoot. Ask me anything in the comments. Like I said, though, as long as there's interest, I'll elaborate more and answer any questions. I've been interested in this topic for a few years now and almost ended up becoming a statistic in it. I didn't even realize it was happening until it was over. I'm on the edge of the Smoky Mountain cluster, and about 15 miles from where Eric Smith, who's listed in David Paulides' Hunter's book, disappeared. A stone's throw away from a lake in Boulder Field. There are a lot of criteria that I met. I honestly believe, because of the things I saw and experienced, that were it not for my faith in God, they'd have found me dead in the creek like so many others have been. Anonymous. Strange encounter in the Pacific Northwest. Hey all, I'm not going to provide exact locations for this, as this happened on the trail that my mom and I walked the dog on every day for 10 years. It was pretty close to our house. I lived in a rural part of the Pacific Northwest, and so there were a lot of trails just outside town that bordered on a lot of forest. This was one of those, but it was probably the biggest trail in my town. It was actually an access road to some stuff, so it was like 10 feet wide and graveled. At the time I briefly went missing, I was about 10 years old and had walked that trail every single day for 3 to 4 years. My mom was with me, as was our dog, an 85-pound Rottweiler Lab Aussie mix. I'd been warned not to go off the trail and wouldn't have normally, but there was a small sub-trail that had a rope swing over a creek. I loved to play there as a kid, and that day I crossed the creek, with a fallen tree bridge, to hang out on the other side while Mom talked to a friend she'd ran into. I was within sight of my mom, clear view across the creek, when all of a sudden it was like things swirled. My surroundings were completely unfamiliar, and there were plants that shouldn't have been there. The wrong kind of trees, with the leaves at slightly the wrong point for the season. Of course, I knew what to do if I got lost. I hugged a tree and shouted for Mom. I was probably 300 yards away at absolute most, probably under 100 yards. She should have heard me, but she didn't. I wasn't there for very long before our dog came and got me. He wasn't a very smart dog. With all love, saying he was as dumb as a bag of rocks would have been an insult to rocks. He also didn't like me nearly as much as he liked my mom, total mama's boy, and would have stayed near her. But he calmly walked up to me, nuzzled my hand so it was on his head, and walked me back out to the creek where I could see my mom. I thought I'd been gone for maybe 15 minutes or so. Apparently, it was an hour plus, and multiple people were looking for me, including walking directly on the path I'd never left. Thank you, Anonymous. Invisible entities. Here are 3 invisible entity experiences that I can think of. Not super long stories, but thought I'd share. Dog sitting. About 14 years ago, I was dog sitting for a friend. I was in the kitchen with my 2 rat terriers and my friend's Vesla. Suddenly, the 3 dogs started barking at something and chased it downstairs. I followed the dogs, who were going crazy trying to get at something, and their hair was standing up along their entire backs. When I got to the basement, I saw all 3 of the dogs circling and barking at something invisible in the center of the room. I couldn't see anything and did not hear any noises. I heard the dogs upstairs and just blew it off. This event happened during the day. Another time I was dog sitting, I watched my friend's dog growl at something in our backyard while standing inside our home. We have a 3-season porch with sliding glass doors to our kitchen, so I was not sure why she would know something was in the backyard while standing in the middle of our home. It was kind of like she sensed something she didn't like, or maybe she saw something on our porch. Her hair was standing up on her entire back. Not the normal little strip of hair, but all the hair on her entire back was standing up. I've owned dogs my whole life and usually never see this much hair stand up on a dog's back. She wasn't barking, only growling nonstop at whatever it was. The fence walker. About 9 years ago, my boyfriend and I were in our backyard putting stain on a project one sunny weekend afternoon. I remember reflecting on how nice and sunny it was when this event happened, and that it was strange it happened in the middle of the day. You usually think of paranormal things happening during the night. It was when our daughter was napping, so it was around 1 p.m. We were in our fenced-in backyard and had our 2 little rat terrier dogs out back with us. Rat terriers are ferocious little dogs who think they're much bigger than their size. They would probably go after a lion if they could. While we were staining, we suddenly heard our dogs barking ferociously near the fence line about 6 feet from where we were. I looked up to see what was going on and watched as our little dogs barked and snapped at the fence near the bottom as they worked their way down the fence line, following something and trying to get at it. I couldn't see anything. Nick turned around and he didn't see anything either, so we went back to staining. When the dogs got to the end of the fence line and could go no further, we heard a loud growl-like shout or word of some kind. It was as if the invisible fence walker had enough of our dogs barking at it, so it yelled back at them. I couldn't tell if it said a strange word I couldn't understand or if it just made an angry noise at them. My boyfriend said that was weird, so I knew he heard the noise as well. The metal chain-link fence is above an underground power line that goes to a large power box in our front yard. The whole length of the fence sits above that underground power line. I sometimes wonder if electricity can cause paranormal things to appear or utilize in events like these. Also wonder if electricity can cause bleed-through between dimensions or other strange quantum events. The living room growl. About 3 years ago, we had some acquaintances, not close friends, over for the afternoon while our two kids played together for about 4 hours. After the couple and their daughter left, we, my boyfriend, my daughter, and I, decided to watch TV. All three of us were on the couch. We had two larger dogs by this time, and they were hanging out with us that day. Our boxer was standing on our lazy boy chair. He usually looks out the window to see all the fun he's missing out in the big world, but I noticed he was staring at something in the middle of our living room instead. He was looking down from standing on the chair, so whatever he was looking at was not far off the floor, maybe about 2 or 3 feet. I couldn't see what he was looking at, and we were sitting only a few feet away from where he was looking. He didn't bark or anything, but just couldn't take his eyes off whatever was there. Suddenly, we all heard a creepy-sounding growl come from where our boxer was looking. This was startling, as we were all sitting only a few feet away from the growl. My boyfriend and I looked at each other wide-eyed, but couldn't say much as we didn't want to scare our daughter. About 5 to 10 seconds after we heard the growl, we heard a pressure-like pop sound from our front picture window that was located about 3 feet from where the growl came from. It sounded like something passed or left our home through our window, and you could hear the pressure/impact on the window as it went through it. I kind of had the feeling it was linked to the guests we had that day, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not sure if the 3 events I've told here are related or completely separate. It is kind of strange that all 3 of them involved our dogs. Signed, Anonymous. Shadow Bandits. Dear Sirs, how long I've waited to hear from others about what I have dealt with. I'm 50 years old now, and this happened to me when I was in my late 20s. I was living in the city of Pomona, California. It was my sister and her family's home. It was located right in front of Pomona High School. From the front yard, you could see the sign in gold metallic letters that spelled out Pomona High. My sister and her family were gone for the weekend. I had the house to myself. I had a large bedroom, which was half of an even larger living room, divided by a ceiling divider that could be opened and closed at will. It was a Friday night. Suddenly, their dog started barking nonstop at the south side of the house. It took me a while to realize it, but there was a gangster-type individual at the south side of the house keeping the dog occupied, while another was rummaging through a shed in the back. I picked up a baseball bat only to look up and see the guy who had been rummaging through the shed looking at me through my window. We stared at each other for a few seconds, then simultaneously bolted toward the front yard. Me unlocking the front door allowed both of the men to escape. I walked back into my room, closed my bedroom door, and sat on my bed. Then I see 2 shadows where my door meets the floor. One started to whisper to the other in English. It was telling the other one what I was doing, play by play. Still angry and fired up from what had just happened, I figured it was the same thieves who had come back and had gotten into the house. I jumped up with the bat again and flung open the door. There was nothing there. I closed the door, and that's when I saw through a window in the house that looked into the indoor laundry room. Two beings walked through the back door like ghosts, then a second locked door like nothing. They weren't shimmering like the predator. They were more like humanoid forms, but just blurs or distortions. If they stood still, you probably wouldn't even know they were there. They came right back to my door and started with the play-by-play stuff. One was bigger than the other. The bigger one was only about 4 feet tall, and the smaller one about 3 feet tall. The terror I felt was unreal. I was in good shape then, and a veteran who had been a problem solver with CID. In other words, I would get rid of people under the table, if you will. The blackest of black missions, legal or not. So I wasn't a stranger to fear in high doses. But fear comes in different flavors, and this flavor was just alien to me. Anyway, I couldn't understand why they spoke such perfect English. I didn't get the impression that they were two adults either. It sounded like the little one was the child or apprentice to the bigger one. I crawled under my bed. It was roughly 10 p.m. I woke at about 9 a.m. and crawled out from underneath my bed. The day was beautiful. The sun was shining, and I felt fearless for about 30 seconds. Those things walked right back into my house, right up to my bedroom door, and started again. This is frightening at night, but when it happens during the day, it's more distressing because at least in the night you have hope of being saved by the light of day. Now there was no hope. The fear was horrid. It finally gave way to my friend rage. There's something inside all of us. It will only come out in super high scenarios of danger or fear. You never know what you have until you go there. Mine is a form of rage that is calm and far more disciplined than I am. I had decided to open the door and bring the bat down on their heads whack-a-mole style. But I think they can read minds because at that moment, they calmly walked out of my house. They were blurs, but yet cast a small shadow. Spoke English. Everything said was in a whisper. I will never forget them. This is a true story. Signed, Freddie Sanchez. Shadow people, shadow beasts. I've recently stumbled upon your videos, which I deeply enjoy. My mostly grown children love watching scary YouTube channels, which I am usually not into. After watching one of your compilations in which you related the events of your mother and subsequent Joshua Tree story, I'm reminded of several events I had in 2002 and 2003. My oldest daughter was born in February of '02 in Mississippi, and shortly after, my wife's parents convinced us to move in with them back in Georgia. We moved back in March or April. We had 2 cats, a male and a female, with us. My in-laws had a split level where the front door opened onto a stairwell up and down. The back went to the bottom floor, which is where we stayed. Me, my 13-year-old brother-in-law, wife, and later my blood brother all had numerous encounters. Back then, the house was at the end of the street with many acres of woods to the rear and one side. Early on after moving in, we had to put the cat's cage on the back porch due to my mother-in-law being allergic. One night, I put them up around dark. I went out and fed them around 10 p.m. as I was going to bed. I went inside and was heading to bed when I heard some very loud animal noises coming from outside. I ran back thinking one of them had gotten stuck. The sounds woke my wife and she came running shortly after. When I got to the cats, Maddox, the female, had been hollowed out. I was a paramedic for many years at a busy 911 service, and I swear I've never seen anything like it. She was open from mid-ribs straight through the groin. Her back legs were broken, and all her organs were gone. The other cat was cowering in the corner of the cage as far away as possible. There was not a drop of blood anywhere. It was horrific and terrifying. I had literally fed them, walked inside, closing the sliding glass door and into the bedroom when this occurred. This was just the beginning of terrible events at this house. When talking to my brother-in-law one day, We got to talking about seeing weird shadow figures. He had grown up in this house, and I had started seeing shadows out of the corners of my eyes very frequently. He started telling me that he had been seeing it for many years and that it used to stand over his bed at night. Every time, dozens, I saw one, I had a deep sense of impending doom. Many small events throughout 2002 occurred, but in 2003, my little brother graduated high school in Florida and moved up to Georgia to be near me. He was often with me. One night, we were out back smoking with the porch light behind me. Around the concrete slab of the porch was a little gated fence about 3 feet high. We'd been sitting outside for a while and had several Coke cans on the railing. While smoking, we heard growling coming from what felt almost everywhere. My brother's a big guy at almost 6'5", and I heard growling from the woods enough that we weren't initially that worried about it. After a few minutes, I squatted down and saw what I could only describe as a very large, shadowy dog with red eyes charge us from where my shadow touched the tree line. I yelled and fell back on my butt. My brother jumped back. As soon as my shadow no longer touched it, it was gone. We ran inside. Several hours later, deciding we weren't going to let our imaginations get the best of us, we went back out to smoke again. We took a flashlight outside and walked over to the tree line while smoking. While looking toward the rear of the property, we saw a pair of red eyes, not glowing, but probably just a deer or dog or something. We were laughing until we saw that it looked like it stood to be about 7 or 8 feet tall. It was intimidating, but figured it might have just been a raccoon climbing a tree. Until we heard loud growling. After earlier, our courage broke, and we hauled ass back toward the house. We could hear something heavy running through the woods to our left. As we reached the gate, it felt like something moved at us from the woods and knocked all the Coke cans off the railing. We got inside and locked the door. My brother-in-law had heard us yelling and came running downstairs. While talking to him, we happened to look at a mirror hanging over the couch, and we could all clearly see what looked like a skull in the reflection of the sliding back door. Again, sorry for the long email. I have so many other events like this I could probably write a book. I would never tell others these stories, as I look at a lot of stuff as just hokey. But your stories, while different, struck a chord. Anyway, if you want any of the other stories, let me know. Thank you for making me feel a little less crazy, and sorry for the long mail. Signed, James. Bizarre vehicle encounter. The only person I've ever shared this story with is my wife. What I experienced was as real as anything else in my life, but I know that most people would not believe me if I tried to explain it to them. I live in Austin, Texas. I notice that not many of your stories come from the Lone Star State, and I want to help remedy that. At this time, I was living at the southernmost point in Austin and working in a city called Round Rock, which is just north of Austin. It was about a 40-mile commute that I embarked on each day to and from work. The shifts at my job were 4 10-hour shifts instead of the traditional 5 8-hour shifts, and I split 2 early shifts and 2 late shifts with one of my coworkers. The late shift meant that I would arrive at work at 11:30 a.m. and leave at 9:30 p.m. The night of my strange experience, I'd been working a late shift. I finished at 9:30, got in my car, and headed down Interstate 35 like normal. It was dark out and a clear night, and most likely relatively warm. I think it was around the month of September in 2013. This is how it unfolded. I was driving in the left lane on the highway, and I passed a section where there's an on-ramp on the right from a connecting highway. As I was passing this area, I noticed a vehicle come down the on-ramp and join the rest of the traffic on I-35. I can't explain exactly what this vehicle looked like because it was dark out, and I don't think I ever stared directly at it. It was a 4-door sedan-type vehicle with potentially any recent make of the last 30 years. What was especially noticeable about the vehicle was its driver, who I can't exactly describe either. He appeared to be a male, 35 to 50 years old. He was hanging out of the driver's side window, waving his left arm in the air and really hooting and hollering like he was having a great time. The vehicle was also making maneuvers that are physically impossible for any kind of car I've ever seen. The vehicle would make semicircles and sometimes full circles around the other cars on the highway while keeping up with the traffic. It's tough to convey how horrifying it was to see this while driving down the highway at night. I didn't even have time to register how unbelievable all of it was. I just had time to see a wildly reckless vehicle swerving around the highway, and I honestly believed that I was about to die. It didn't seem like there was any way a car could do that without causing a major accident. I didn't even tense up because I was so sure of impending impact. I actually relaxed my body as much as I could. But me and all the other vehicles just continued down the highway. It was torture watching this maniac out of the side of my eye, and he had this presence of really taunting me or anyone else who could see him. At one point, some debris hit the right side of my vehicle. It was probably just some pebbles on the highway, but I remember thinking this crazy driver was throwing something at me. Amazingly, after just a minute or so, the crazy driver took the next exit and left the highway. I watched the vehicle as it went down the off-ramp and joined the street traffic, and it was continuing to jerk around wildly until I lost sight of it. The next few minutes of driving, I took a few deep breaths of relief, and only after several minutes did I start to piece together what had just happened and realize that I just had a paranormal experience right there on the highway. I hope you appreciate my story. Signed, Alex. Invisible Entity Encounter. Hi. I commented under one of your videos my story about my encounter with an invisible entity. Here's the story again. In late 2014, I was living in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania with my now ex-husband and 2 boys. We lived in a trailer on his uncle's property. His uncle lived directly across from us about 20 feet, and there were also 2 other trailers on his property to the right down at the bottom of a hill on the property with woods next to it. This was November. It was cold, I remember. Being that we lived in the sticks, my ex's uncle would burn the trash, so one dusk I go out to walk the trash to the bottom of the hill. As I'm walking past the trailers situated to the right, I hear a rustling noise seemingly coming from the roof of one of the trailers. I look and see nothing, thinking it's just an animal of some sort. I walk a few more steps, almost now to less than a foot past the second trailer, when I hear the thud of feet hit the ground from atop the trailer. But there's nothing there. I stand there baffled for a moment, and as I said, the sun was setting. So just as whatever this was starts toward the woods, I catch the glimpse of an outline of a humanoid figure, and I watch as the brush parts as this thing walks through and into the woods. My thoughts were, WTF was that? Am I actually awake? Is this a dream? A glitch in the Matrix? Then to, it's aliens. So I threw the garbage and ran back up to my trailer and tell my ex, whom of course didn't believe me. Now a few days prior to this, I had an encounter with a UFO. I'm an avid sky watcher and was out with my flashlight, a long cop-style light. I saw this bright light that was quite low. It was not a star. So I started shining my light on it and clicked the flashlight on and off 3 times. It mimics my flashes. I stood there completely convinced that yes, there are ETs, definitely. We did this on and off for about 15 to 20 more minutes, then the light suddenly vanished, as if it just faded into the night sky. Complete camouflage. I did not recall falling asleep that night, and woke with my pants torn to shreds. Make of that what you will. I've had strange encounters all my life, starting back to when I was a child. I've seen angels, UFOs, ETs, orbs, and I believe a Bigfoot, too, not far from where my encounter with the invisible entity was. I've also had 3 near-death experiences and heard the voice of God as I was going to the beautiful heavenly colored lights. I truly believe that the world we live in is no doubt stranger than fiction. Thank you for reading my story. Sincerely, Sonny J. Harmful humanoid. This happened to me in 2016. I moved from New Mexico to Washington State. Well, I used to go walking with a family member every morning after taking her children to school near Battleground, Washington, in Battleground Lake State Park. On this particular day, she had errands to run, so I found myself going alone. I park my car, get out, stretch, and get ready for my 3-mile daily walk. So I started off walking and got about 5 minutes into the park, and everything fell quiet, eerily quiet at that, and nothing looked familiar. I got this weird feeling I was no longer alone. I could feel someone or something watching me. I panicked and started walking faster. I could hear twigs breaking around me in every direction, so I started walking faster still. Suddenly, I'm in a full-on running sprint. I broke from the tree line and ended up really far away from my car, like 15 minutes away, when I know I'd barely walked a few minutes. I could still hear hurried footsteps behind me, though, and all of a sudden I felt hands behind my back, and I was shoved hard to the ground. Whatever had done it with such hatred and anger that when I fell, I actually heard my bones break underneath me. I'd shattered my elbow and broke my wrist, and that's not even the worst part. Well, thank God the person driving saw me before I was pushed in front of his car. But he did say he saw what looked like a humanoid, shadowy figure literally push me in front of his car. The damn thing literally tried to kill me, I tell you. I never went for a walk into those woods again. Signed, Anonymous. Translucent being in Zion National Park. In October 2016, I was in Zion National Park. I came up to meet my parents, but they drove back to Vegas the next day, and I wanted to do a hike. They're both handicapped and can't keep up with me hiking. So I stayed behind and hiked Watchman Trail by myself. Zion is always busy, but this day was relatively calm, and there were very few people on Watchman, which is a less popular trail. I enjoy sitting in nature when I hike, so about 3/4 of the way up the trail, I found a beautiful spot with a little stream and blue dragonflies. I stopped to relax and watch the dragonflies and was sitting on a big boulder just on the shoulder of the trail. I hadn't seen any people for a while and was in a bit of a meditative trance. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye to my right, I caught a glimpse of something big moving toward me. I turned to look, and for a split second, I saw a huge, translucent humanoid with very long arms walking toward me on the trail. The best way to describe its gait is lumbering. All within a split second, I saw it, I had an intuitive feeling that it knew that I could see it, and it vanished. It didn't run or turn back, it just vanished into thin air. I did not feel it was malicious, just surprised I could see it. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but I've never seen ghosts or anything ethereal before. My gift is clairaudience. I couldn't get it out of my head, and later told my now husband I'd seen something I could only describe as like the Predator movie, but with a Bigfoot outline. I'd never seen anything like this video or David Paulides' work before, and that's the description I came up with. I first heard of someone else seeing something like this in Missing 411, and both my husband and I were shocked. I have no idea what the explanation is, but I know what I saw. Thank you. Signed, Kelly. Friendly stick being encounter. My experience with the stick being wasn't unpleasant because it was so mischievous and made me smile. This was 30 years ago, and I collected bare winter branches from the floor of the woods to display in a white china vase in my home. After a few days, I started to find little things disappearing, then a little time later, finding the missing object in a ridiculously visible place. Example, losing my watch from beside my kitchen sink, then finding it balanced on the rim of the bath, a floor above me, and after I'd had a bath when there was no sign of my watch there. After a time, I saw peripherally a small, black, knobbly stick man about 18 inches high. He had twig limbs about as thick as your little finger, an oval, smooth face, sparkling eyes, thin-lipped big grin, and really funny nub-like hair and frondy bits too, all of it a darkish charcoal color. It peeped at me from various places, and I would hear a rather delightful tinkly laugh, and knew it meant me no harm, and was just having fun with me. So I began just chatting to him. Knew he was male somehow, as if he was just a pal or friend visiting, and also left out nuts, honey in a tiny pot, and bits of fruit at night, and it was always gone in the morning, even the tiny pot. I knew, after a time, that he wasn't there by chance, so I thought back to see when he may have arrived. It didn't take long to realize it was the sticks I'd taken. He'd come with them. So I took them from the vase and announced I was sorry I'd taken the twigs without permission and was taking them back where I'd found them, but that I'd enjoy his company, and pleased he had liked my food gifts and he was welcome to return any time. I returned the sticks and twigs and said sorry for just taking them and left, but learned a valuable lesson never to take things from nature unless you ask permission first. It's so important because nature spirits can cause you misfortune, even illness, if you disrespect them. Always ask, even when berry picking, and if I feel a negative atmosphere, I go somewhere else. I used to call my visitor Twig Man, and yes, he occasionally returned, and I gave him food gifts. He sometimes left me seeds, which I planted. This is true, and it never struck me as odd or thinking I was delusional. I'm very stoic and level-headed, but I'm not blinkered. Please respect nature, and it will respect you, and often give you things money can't buy, good things for your well-being. Thank you. Signed, Anonymous. Anubis or Dogman? Hearing these stories makes me think of the Anubis-type creature I saw once. I think it may have been a guardian spirit, but who knows? I was a child at the time, and me and Papa were out tilling the garden, and in doing so, dug up some native artifacts. He was part native, so he put them all back, but me, being a kid, I kind of stole a couple. Then I was visited every night for a good 4, 5, 6 nights by this Anubis-type entity who never showed his face, but I could see the outline of his shadow. A canine head with a man's body and very tall. First night, he told me to put the things back to honor my ancestors by being honest. I thought I was dreaming. Next night, same thing, but he would move closer to my bed every night. By the 5th night, he was right next to my bed and told me not to be afraid, but that I really needed to put the things back so they could rest. It was very uncomfortable for me to be that close to whatever this was, so the next day I put it all back, and the entity never came back again. But I always felt watched after that, and I'd see black shadows out of the corner of my eyes all the time. I was never scared, per se, just more curious because this thing looked weird but seemed kind. Linda Godfrey put my story in one of her books. She was totally fascinated. I am too. I'd love to know what that was exactly. I also think possibly this or these entities lived in the back corner of our property, or even possibly a Bigfoot. That corner was not to be messed with at all, according to my papa. He said to never go there, and every time I got close to it, I got sick like I was going to throw up. It was by this shelf formation in the ground. Could have been anything, but possibly a sort of mound of some kind that had been messed with to clear the land. I don't know. Kids are normally scared of things like that, but I only got scared after it left. Never understood that part either. I've been more fascinated than scared with the things I've seen or encountered. There was something in my grandparents' house that caused me to run through the hall because it felt like if I didn't, it would take me. I have no idea what that was all about. That entire house and land had some weird vibes surrounding and in it. And when I moved my kids in after my grandparents died, they also felt and experienced weird things there. Love, Nikki. House of Shadows. I became aware of the shadows shortly after moving into my house in New Jersey. My daughter's playroom was in the basement, and they were constantly complaining that they were always seeing something move out of the corners of their eyes. My youngest also said they hovered near the ceiling. In later years, I had my floral workshop in the basement and saw them constantly. It got to the point where I could talk to them with my mind, not that they ever answered back. They were black. We saw them all over the basement, but mostly along one wall, and occasionally saw them along the same wall on the first floor and in the kitchen near the back door. We did not see them anywhere else on the house or elsewhere on the property. But even when we did not get a glimpse of them, we were aware when they were present. Some of them seemed to have an evil presence. A few years after we moved in, I told them they were not welcome in the house and the evil presence seemed to go away. Still, we had an uneasy feeling about them. Not fear. We just accepted they were there, as several steps taken over the years to make them go away didn't work anyway. Only once after the evil ones were told they were not welcome was I aware they came back, and I'm not sure if they were evil or just upset. I will explain later. Only once did I see one clearly, but it happened in a split second, and I did not see it from top to bottom. I was walking through the breakfast room into the kitchen. The kitchen light was on in the corner. It was by the back door in front of the stove. I was startled. I thought someone had come into the house. It all happened very fast, but the light from behind it did not pass through as it would a shadow. It was short and stocky and appeared as a silhouette of a person. It had a head. There were no discernible features, including no eyes, shoulders, arms, and a torso. It disappeared too fast to take note if it had legs or feet. I sensed it was as surprised as I was and did not intend to be seen. Then our house caught fire. It was a major fire that started from a shorted TV along the wall of shadows in the den. We were out of the house 6 months while it was repaired. About a week after the fire, I stopped by right before dark to pick up a few things. As I came onto the back porch and looked through the 6-foot hole where the picture window once was, I looked across the breakfast room at the basement doorway. I sensed 3 shadows near the doorway. It was almost dark outside, so I did not actually see them. I also got a very bad feeling about them and told them by thought that the evil ones were still not welcome in the house whether I was there or not. Then I turned and left without entering the house. I was quite rattled. Whether I had this feeling because I was also emotionally upset about the fire, I cannot say. The next day, I went back and it seemed the house was full of shadows, although I only caught a glimpse of them as usual, fleeing in the basement. And I'm not sure I really saw them as there were no lights on down there and the only light was from the window well windows. It was the only time I ever sensed that they tried to communicate. It seemed they were upset that we were not there because the house was all black. There was no light for them in the kitchen, and there were strangers in the house, the workers, every day. A few weeks later, burglars tried to steal the new appliances for the house. Everything was left in the kitchen by the back door. My daughters and I joked that they met up with the shadows and were scared off. Who knows? Signed, Mike. A dashing shadow. When I was younger, I lived in a ranch-style home with my mom and grandma. My mom and I had chosen to have our rooms in the basement, hers in the back corner, and mine in a sectioned-off area of the main living room recreational area down there. Her bedroom was connected both to her bathroom and the main living area, the bathroom door being in her room and the door leading to the living area being catty-corner with a door that led to the bathroom from the main living area. One night in particular, I remember playing with my Legos. I was probably 9 or 10, when I happened to look up at my mom's bedroom door. As I looked through that door, it became more and more apparent that there was something there. It had no facial features and was nothing more than a silhouette of a small person with really swooshy hair. After about a minute of looking at this shadow, it dashed into the bathroom via the door directly connecting the bathroom and the bedroom. In disbelief, I continued playing with my Legos when I felt something staring at me. As I looked up, I couldn't believe my eyes. The same shadow was now standing directly in the bathroom doorway. Now, I know it had no face, much less eyes, but it was staring, watching, perhaps even waiting. It almost immediately sprinted into my mom's room at which point I sprinted up the stairs, tears of fear running down my face. After that incident, I could never be alone in the basement at night, and my bedroom was moved to one of the spare rooms upstairs. I wish I could say that this was the last of my experiences, but alas, it is not. This same shadow person followed me to several different houses, including the one I'm in now. Signed, Anonymous. It called to me, and I answered. I'm not usually one to talk about my situation, as it happened about 14 years ago. And anyone that I have gone out of my way to share this with immediately put a lot of discredit upon the topic. My spouse and close friends have always been the most intrigued. Only had one occurrence that I recall the most, and the others did not have as much substance behind it as this one did. When I was 14, I was sharing the basement recreation area with my stepbrother at the time. My parents had spent time building me a room in the basement at my request, but lo and behold, I slept most of the time out on the playroom, or whatever you wanted to call it. I didn't start sleeping in my room till I was probably 16. However, this instance further confirmed why I didn't. It was between 2 and 4 a.m. I don't recall the exact time, but I had originally fallen asleep on the floor next to the futon my stepbrother was sleeping on. He faced the wall and was heavily snoring to boot. I'd woken up and couldn't fall directly back to sleep, so I tossed and turned while the ambience of the TV kept spreading around the basement. Out of nowhere, I became completely stiff and unable to move my entire body but my neck and head. At this point, feet point to the wall and the TV behind me. I started to look around because I had become immediately filled with anxiety and fear. I was thinking of this being sleep paralysis at the time, until the next step took place. I laid there in silence, heavy snoring from my left. It felt as if someone or something was sitting on my body, restraining me by the shoulders, which, due to claustrophobia issues, freaked me out. I heard a very faint voice at first in the distance. "Josh, are you there? I know you're there." Eyes peeled wide open, trying to diagnose me being crazy at this point. It then spoke again. "Josh, can you hear me? I know you can hear me. Come to your bedroom." I continued to try and ignore it as I felt I was about to puke, and I was becoming really scared. In a much louder, gruffer voice, it spoke to me again. "Josh, I know you can hear me. Come to your bedroom." As if the biggest weight was off my body, I was immediately able to move, and I sat up in a split second and rose to my feet. This voice continued to call my name and demand my presence in my room. Like any unoriginal horror movie, I was pleading with my brain to not do it, but stupid me decided to make way to the bedroom. The door always remained shut, and as I put my hand on the doorknob, I hear her one more time. "Josh, are you coming? Open the door." As I opened the door, I had a small basement window, at the time big enough to sneak out of the house, parallel to the doorway. As I slowly creaked open the door in a cold sweat, there was what appeared to be a dim-lit yellow eye shapes in the window in the shape of some sort of dark figure staring deep into my soul. Wide-eyed and terrified, I looked up and was locked on for about 30 seconds. They got brighter and became dim, and that repeated. I slammed the door immediately and bolted to the other end of the basement for the light and proceeded to rock back and forth because there was no explanation. My brother woke up in a panic as I was petrified. We went back in the room together and turned the light on, and nothing was there. Nothing was outside as we went and checked further. He stayed up with me for a bit till I fell back asleep, and nothing like that occurred again. I cannot advise whom, why, where, or what, but it has left the biggest impact on me to this day. I know the difference between dreaming and being in an altered state of mind, but this was the most real I have ever felt behind a paranormal episode. That voice makes my body tingle and hair on my arms raise every time I think about it. I feel good knowing that I'm not completely alone in this type of thing, and all I can do is hold on to the memory as nothing has been explained or uncovered otherwise. Signed, Josh. I never had a name for them until now. So I never knew it was really a thing until recently, that there was a name for them. I've never, and hope that I never have, an experience with the Hat Man, but shadow people I've had one encounter with. I was probably about 14 or 15, babysitting for one of my parents' friends. Me and the kids were curled up on the couch watching TV. It's hard to explain because of how their living room was set up. The couch we were on was directly in front of the hallway, and the back bedroom was their room, and in front of us the big glass TV stand, and it reflected the couch, hallway, and doorway of their room. Their bedroom light was on, so I could see the beginning of their room, which I assume that's why the furniture was positioned the way it was, so the parents could easily see in their room. I remember feeling really weird that night, as I often did in their house. Scared, and I remember the youngest asking me, "What's that in my room?" I looked at the part of the glass that reflected into their room, and it was a shadowed figure. What was striking was that it wasn't like a smudge or misshapen. It was almost like a perfect outline of someone. I looked back at him and then back at the glass, and it was gone. Now, like almost fear-stricken, I looked behind me, and there was nothing. I remember this because the child actually saw it too, and then told his mother about it when she got home later that night. Not only that, but I had never experienced anything like it in my life, but just chalked it up to light bouncing off the glass wrong or some rationalization until I heard others talking about it. Signed, Mark. The Shadow Person. When I was a teenager, I was home alone one weekend, and I was sleeping in my parents' room since there was a TV in there. Sometime around 2 a.m., I felt like I was being stared at from the direction of the hallway. I looked up, and I saw a shadow person looking at me. It was weird because it was a pure man-shaped black mass, and I could see him in the dark hallway. I'm guessing light from the TV helped. I sat up and stared back, but I was terrified. We looked at each other for probably 5 seconds, and then it turned and walked down the hall. A few seconds later, I heard a loud crash. I was so scared I turned the TV to the Disney Channel and stayed awake for as long as possible. When I woke up the next morning, I walked down the hall to the bathroom, and that's when I noticed a mirror that was hanging and had fallen off the wall and was shattered. My family still doesn't believe me, but I know what happened. Signed, Nancy. Mirror Man. When I was younger, there was a man at the top of my stairs. I used to go to the bathroom every night between about 12 and 3, and he would always be there. He was a shadow on a mirror. I was only about 4 or 5, but other people saw him too. He even tried to push one of them down the stairs. Since moving into the house across the road, though, I haven't seen or heard from him. I can't go in my old house upstairs because there's a very unwelcome and hostile feeling to it. I still can't work out who he is. I've also seen him in my friends' houses, and he just stands there, looking at me, although there's no face, just a shadow. Signed, Lauren. Unable to leave. I was only about 10 or 11 when I went to this house. It was daytime, and the building was well lit. I looked into a few rooms and saw nothing out of the ordinary until I turned into a hallway. It was at the other end of the hall, looking at me. Although it had no eyes, the feeling was undeniable. The shadow person and I watched each other for some time. I didn't think it was real, but then it started walking toward me slowly. I turned and ran. I looked over my shoulder, and it had traveled about 7 meters in the split second I looked away. But when I had my eyes on it, it moved slowly. I got out of the house and looked at it again. It had stopped at the door, almost like it was unable to leave the house. It turned and walked back into the house. Signed, Courtney. Scared Skeptic. When my wife was pregnant with our daughter, we saw one in the house we were renting. I'd just gotten off the graveyard shift. We were chatting before going to bed, and my wife said she saw something in the back room. Our cat was on watch, perched on my wife's belly, occasionally growling. I was a big skeptic. That's a bunch of BS, etc. That morning, I started toward the back room with that attitude and stopped in my tracks when both of us saw the hunched black shape move and turn to look at us with those horrible red eyes. I honestly wish I could say I didn't see what I did, but I sure as hell did. Still freaks me out. Signed, Dylan. Daughter's experience. Starting at 4 or 5 years old, when we moved into our house, my daughter has been afraid of our basement. She said that she could hear children laughing, weird sounds, and that the dark man lived down there. She also said that she had a ghost friend she called Bradley staying upstairs, and that Bradley keeps the dark man away from the top floor. When she was around 15, she was home with a friend, sitting on the couch watching a movie. Both she and her friend saw a dark shadow in the shape of an adult upper torso hovering by the front door. Within seconds of seeing the shape, it flew toward them and then straight down the stairs. My daughter said it was scary, but she's been more accustomed to bizarre happenings. The friend never came over again. Signed, Anonymous. I don't know what it is. This started happening to me about 1.5 years ago. One of my friends and I were walking to a friend's house, and we were taking a shortcut. Then, out of nowhere, there was a shadow figure about as tall as me, which is 6'3". It had a tail like a wolf and was all black. When I first started seeing it, it had eyes about the size of 2 pennies. But as time went on, they got bigger and bigger. The last time I saw it, its eyes were about the same size as a lime. Not only that, they changed color. What scares me the most is the fact that the last time I saw it, it was about 2 months ago. It used to show up a few times a week, and its eyes were crimson, which is the aura color of hatred. I've been attacked by it before. Painful ear-ringing, nausea, and dizziness. It might have gone away, but I think it might be planning something. Nothing has happened yet. Just waiting for it to show up again. Then I'm going to banish it as best as I can. Signed, Cameron. 2 sightings by the same witness, with clicking sounds. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing by the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandma just kept an eye on me from the kitchen or living room because the house had huge windows that faced the woods. She would come out every once in a while just to see what I was up to. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt at the time and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention that this is Midwest Illinois, not too far from Cahokia bounds, so finding arrowheads was actually not that uncommon. Anyway, that day, I remember picking out a spot to dig. I'd been out there for quite a while because I remember I had a pretty decent-sized hole going when something caught my eye up in the tree that I was next to. I almost don't know how to explain it, but it looked almost like a heat wave coming off the branch of the tree. It was fall. I remember this because I had my pink jacket on, and remember thinking my mom was going to be pissed because I had dirt around the bottom of the arms from digging. Also remember there being a lot of leaves on the ground. So anyway, I'm staring at this heat wave and realize that it has a human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, and wondering why there's an invisible man in the tree. I remember feeling scared, but unsure what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. This is about the time that I decided that I was not supposed to be seeing this, and I hightailed it back to the house. My grandmother saw that I was pretty shaken, and I remember telling her that I'd just seen an angel. In my 5-year-old mind, I didn't know what else it could be. I'd never heard of aliens or ghosts or monsters, so to me, it had to be an angel because that's all my little mind could think of. Fast forward to when I'm about 12 years old. By this time, the encounter was way out of my mind. I loved watching action sci-fi movies. My dad had rented a movie called Predator. I was watching it with him, and the first time you see the Predator invisible or cloaked, I about shit my pants. All the memories from that day digging in the dirt came flooding back. I even asked my dad if Predator was real, or if he knew of anyone or any animal that had cloaking ability that I didn't know about. He told me that it was all fake. It wasn't like it is today where I could just Google it. I had no access to the internet, so again, I just put it out of my mind. Now fast forward to about the year 2004. I'm grown now, and I have 3 small children. I just went through a separation from my husband. I moved to the next town over to an apartment with my kids. These apartments are all one-level duplexes with there being 5 buildings. I'm at the very last apartment in the last building. The apartments are considered in town, but are on the outskirts. There's a deep ditch that runs behind the buildings with a chain-link fence that separates the backyard from the ditch. There's about 6 or 7 trees on our side of the fence, and if you follow the ditch line a little bit, you hit a small forest that eventually leads to the country with a larger forest and farmland. Now, I'm a smoker, but wouldn't smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often went out to the back porch to smoke. One night I was up late doing laundry and stuff after the kids went to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before I myself went to sleep. I'm back there on the porch, and I started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately looked to the ditch because I'd seen a groundhog out there a few days before and thought perhaps he was out there again. The yard is faintly lit from the outside light that's by the playground that is to the right of my back porch. I didn't turn on my porch light. I didn't normally if I was just going out for a quick smoke. I didn't see any groundhog or movement from the ditch, so I go back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound keeps happening, and a slight shift of movement makes me look up into the tree to the left of my porch. It's there. The same invisible thing I'd seen when I was 5. The same like distortion and in a humanoid shape. It's crouched down on the branch with an arm holding onto the trunk of the tree. I couldn't believe it. I was like, is this happening? Has it come to kill me from seeing it all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids in the apartment sleeping. I ran in and slammed and locked the door, then ran to the kids' rooms and made sure all the windows were locked. Then I just turned out the lights in the living room and stared out the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for about a good 10 minutes and couldn't see anything. I began to think maybe I was just tired, my mind was playing tricks on me. Just as I was finally talking myself down, a neighbor's dog comes running across the yard and starts barking at the tree at the same branch where I'd seen this predator thing. That pretty much freaked me out because this dog was not a barker. I actually have never heard him bark at anything, even at the groundhog that had been hanging out in the ditch. This barking went on for a few minutes until I hear the neighbor lady who owns the dog call him back inside. The dog reluctantly turned to go back home, stopping every few feet to look back at the branch of the tree until he was out of my sight. I didn't sleep well that night and have never seen anything like it again. I don't know what to think of it. I'm a grown woman. I have kids and a good career. I just want to know if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this. I know what I saw, believe it or not. Anonymous. Man sees invisible creature in treetops, Nashville, Tennessee. In 1993 or 1994, I'm not sure, I was living in a place in Nashville, Tennessee, a small town called Antioch. I was out walking the dog one day, or letting the dog do his business out in the front yard. I could feel something watching me. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and everybody around there was at work except for me. But I could just feel something watching me. I started looking at the woods, down in the woods directly in front of me. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the leaves rustling in the trees. So I started looking up towards the tops of the trees, and I had very good eyesight at the time. I didn't do drugs, I didn't drink, but I saw something crouched down in the tops of the trees. The only way I could describe it, and I don't even know if the movie had come out yet, so I don't know anything about it, but the movie Predator, where they saw the invisible creature. You could see the outline and everything, but you could see right through it. And it was sitting up in the very tops of the trees, where it wouldn't hold the weight of a man by any means. Now, this thing was as big as a man. I just stood there looking at it, and then I let go of the leash and I took off at a dead run and I yelled, "Hey!" Took off towards this thing, and it started running across the tops of the trees. It ran the length of a football field in just no time. I mean, it was really fast. I don't know how it was running across the tops of the trees, but I know what I saw. After I thought about it, I thought, what in the world are you doing chasing this thing? I stopped, and it stopped about the length of a football field away from where it started, and it turned around and looked at me again, and then it took off through the woods, through the tops of the trees, out into the woods, and I didn't see it again. It scared the hell out of me, I know that. And I never ever told anybody about it because I thought people would think I was crazy as a loon. Greg. Transparent creature on top of trees. Early one morning, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., my dogs woke me. I let them outside, and they took off running across the patio and down the slope behind my house. Normally, they just walked out. At that moment, the bending and swaying of two 7-foot blue spruce trees 30 feet away from me caught my attention. I could see movement and an outlined creature jumping onto the top of one tree. It didn't climb. It jumped from ground level to the top of the tree. I saw the movement and then the top of the tree bend. Then it jumped onto the next tree about 3 feet away. Both trees bent over with the weight. There was no wind, and the tops of the trees bent and swished as if something heavy had jumped on them. I saw the outline of a creature that was transparent, but ape or monkey-like, jump from one tree to the next. I could see the tree through it, but the outline of the creature was white and sharply defined. My impression was that it was around 5 or 6 feet tall. The landscape lighting gave me a clear view of the trees. As I stared out the patio door, the top of the patio cover over my head, which is constructed of wood beams and wood, started sounding as something heavy was on top walking. The trees were now standing straight as normal. I didn't see it leave the trees, but I had the impression that there might have been 2 of them. I didn't feel threatened, but I definitely wanted to close and lock the door. I called the dogs, thank goodness they were already almost to the door, and then closed it. My dogs usually go out in the morning and have for years. This was the one and only time anything like this had happened. Anonymous. What was it? Back in 2001, my family and I moved into an apartment. It was located in a rural, heavily wooded area in central Kentucky. It was an apartment, but it was located outside of town. Though there were houses near the apartment, there was a large surrounding of woods, and the closest house was about a half a mile away. We both worked second shift and got off work at around the same time every night. One night, my wife and stepson did their normal preparations before bed, took showers, baths, and they went to bed. My stepson had been having night terrors, so we'd been letting him sleep with us. After their baths, they went to bed around 11:30 p.m. It was the weekend, and we both didn't have to work the next day, so I decided to stay up late and play around on the computer. They'd been in the bed for only a few minutes, and they both screamed out my name in a panic. I got up and ran down the hallway to the bedroom and flipped on the light. They were both sitting up and wide-eyed. They looked petrified. I asked, "What happened? What's wrong?" My wife answered, "The bed started shaking." I'd not believe in ghosts or paranormal things at that time, but I looked around, under the bed, in the bathroom, saw nothing, so I kind of laughed it off and said maybe it was our dog. We had a very small dog, a Maltese. My wife said it wasn't the dog. The bed literally came up off the floor. They were both in tears. Though I wanted to believe her, I thought there was a logical explanation, or it may have been her imagination. I told her if anything else happened to just yell and I'd come back. I was going back to the computer and was only 10 or 12 feet away down the hallway. I flipped their light off, went back to the computer. They stayed in there and went to sleep. A couple of hours later, I went to bed. The next morning, my wife and stepson got up early around 8 a.m. and went to town to go to Walmart. I decided to stay and sleep in. They left, and easily I went back to sleep. Some time later, I was awakened to the bed shaking, but it did not register what had happened the night before. I didn't pay much attention. I didn't even open my eyes. Then the bed shook a second time. I then opened my eyes, but still, it just didn't register, and I closed my eyes again. A third time, the bed shook, only this time it shook more violently. This time it hit me, what had happened the previous night. Instantly, I opened my eyes and sat up, turned and looked to the front of the bed. There was one window in that bedroom. In the mornings, the sun would shine into that window. I mention this because I think that was the only reason I saw it. The only way I can describe it is it had the outline and figure of a person, but clear with distortion. Because of how the sun was shining in the window, the light hit it, and it had either glares or sparkles, making it possible where I could see it, similar to the description I've recently heard. It was probably about 6 feet in height. I could see its arms were extended and connected to the front of the bed frame. I remember having a pure feeling of fear and dread. I was terrified. My father and mother were very religious and had time to time spoken of evil spirits and demons and told us children if we ever saw anything to use the name of Jesus Christ to protect us. So my reaction was only to say, "In Jesus Christ's name, leave me alone." I instantly jumped up out of bed and ran out of that bedroom and down the hallway. As I came into our living room, my wife and stepson had just walked in the door. My wife asked me what was wrong. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. It took me a few minutes to speak. Finally, I told her what happened. We stayed in that place for about another week. During this time, we all slept on the floor in the living room with every light on in the apartment, with the bedroom door shut. We wouldn't even go to the bathroom alone. After a week passed, we moved out. Looking back, my wife, myself, and stepson had some other odd occurrences that happened there. We just never realized it until years later. Once, I was alone there, and there was a knock at the front door, which was a few feet from where I was sitting. I got up, opened the door, nobody was there, and nobody lived remotely close. One time, I remember sitting at the computer. I had the TV turned off for peace and quiet. I could hear and feel heavy movement on the floor as if someone had taken steps behind me. But when I turned around, nothing. My stepson had the night terrors, but one particular morning he had gotten out of his bed before my wife and I had awakened. He somehow unlocked the door and went outside. My wife woke up and found the front door wide open and went outside to find him running and playing with our dog in a wet, dewy field at 6 to 7 a.m. in the morning. When she approached him, he had no memory, and we came to the conclusion he had been sleepwalking. Several times, both inside and outside, my wife and I got the strange feeling we were being watched. As I said, my wife and stepson remember everything that happened, but never feel comfortable talking about it when I try to bring it up. It's been almost 20 years now, and not a day passes it doesn't pass through my mind. What was it? I don't think it was a ghost. It's possible it was a demon, but the fact that it looked like cloaking, that's what makes me think it was technology. I know this. Its intentions weren't good. It was as if it was watching us, toying with us, and the fact that I laughed at what happened to my wife and stepson, thinking it was in their head, must have made it upset. Why else did it stick around to make its presence known to me? After that occurrence, to my memory or knowledge, I never saw it again. Signed, Philip Hayden. Transparent entity. I'm a disabled former EMT/firefighter from the southwesternmost corner of Virginia, and I had an unexplained encounter while performing some work in my yard recently. My yard is located near a number of landmarks, and sightings of cryptids aren't uncommon. Less than an hour from me, in different directions, are Natural Tunnel State Park and Wilderness Road State Park. The Cumberland Gap area, which I believe is a federal recreational area, is within that same hour's distance. Then there's the big one, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is around 2.5 hours away. It is a great privilege to live amidst such natural beauty, but this experience has made things a little unsettling. It was late afternoon, and I was just doing some odds and ends around the yard recently, trying to occupy my time before the next semester begins at college. I live in the middle of town, but in a county with less than 10 traffic signals, I can't exactly say I live in an urban area. My yard is very large, and due to the location of surrounding structures and geography, it is nearly invisible from the main thoroughfare that goes through my town, a road known as the Wilderness Trail. I was definitely working up a sweat, but having over a decade and a half of EMS experience, I know to stay hydrated, and being diabetic and not as young as I once was, I know not to overdo it. I was heading back to my air-conditioned yard barn turned man cave for a break when I heard what sounded like the buzzing of a medium to high quality photography drone above and behind me, which would be coming from the east. Given the abundance of natural beauty in my area, it is an understatement to say that there are plenty of drone photographers around here. Some of the most amazing nature footage I've ever seen is produced right here in my community. What I saw, though, wasn't at all what I expected. Instead of a drone, I saw an undulating, transparent blob heading directly for me from the clear blue sky above. Being an avid listener of channels like this one, as well as Dave Politis and Rusty West, I immediately made the link in my mind to the multiple stories of predator-like transparent figures I'd heard before. I didn't bother to run, but I tried to think fast and keep on my path to my shed. I managed to turn just as whatever it was hit me. The sensation I felt is difficult to describe. It was like the pins and needles one might feel when waking up with a limb still asleep, but all over my body. A heaviness, like I'd gained 50 pounds suddenly, and a momentary lapse in time, like slow motion, all at once. My level of consciousness was unaffected, though, and it went away as quickly as it came. Had it been a unilateral sensation, as in only on one side of my body, I would have 100% suspected a transient ischemic attack, or what most call a mini-stroke. I, while continuing on my accelerated trek to my shed, looked back to see yet another one of these things coming at me. Before I reached the door and got safely inside, I was hit a total of 3 times, and the buzzing didn't subside until a few seconds after I'd shut and locked the door. I stayed inside for a good long while, collecting my thoughts and having a few bottled waters. I flipped on YouTube on the TV I have in my man cave, and reclined back on the little bed I built along the back wall by my desk. Suddenly, both my legs cramped up fiercely. The cramps were so sudden and alarming, I stood, frozen in place, and considered calling 911, as I could not even walk. Within a couple of agonizing minutes, though, my legs began to relax with rapid cycling muscle spasms, gradually subsiding until I was back to normal. This was my first and, so far, only experience of this nature. Hearing your recent guest, Sean, inspired me to comment my experience on your channel. His proximity to me and medical background helped me muster up the courage to speak up about it. I hadn't even mentioned it to my wife because she doesn't share my enthusiasm for all things paranormal. Thanks so much for the invitation to share my story. Signed, Joshua. It was a predator-like figure. Having my own encounters made me curious as to how others may have had different experiences than mine. Hopefully, I might be able to shed some light on their character with my own encounters. But this could be like saying because a person is nice, all people are nice, and we know that is so far from the truth, unfortunately. The first encounter was when I was young, around 7 years old, and happened to be at a park playing with a friend. This park was across the street from my home, and once when I was left alone because my friend had to go home, I heard some barking across the park and saw a large group of dogs. I didn't feel comfortable sticking around, so went to making a dash for home. But this pack of dogs, a group of around 7 different breeds, the largest being a German Shepherd, caught up with me halfway home. Circling me, they were barking, growling with teeth bared, and my heart was pounding wildly. I was scared out of my mind. To my horror, the smaller dogs tried to go after the back part of my legs. The German Shepherd was the worst and went to lunging at my throat. It was pure adrenaline that allowed me to dodge and sidestep these attacks, and possibly some good luck. The other dogs went after my stomach, and every time I went to put my arms out in defense, they went to trying to grasp hold. But still, I managed to keep from being harmed. The attacks continued with me feeling the end was near, and it would only be a matter of time before they brought me down. Thinking back on this, it felt like they were trying to take me down with mercy, not a joy kill, but for food. The German Shepherd lunged again, and like teamwork, the other dogs kept going after my legs and arms. It was the third lunge from this largest dog going after my throat when I saw this predator-like figure. Very fast in its motions, in mid-lunge, this dog was slammed down back onto its hind legs, and the predator man, as I called him, took it almost backwards, nearly breaking its back. Holding it for a while, the dog struggled in its embrace, and finally it broke away. And during that time, I was in shock and didn't even think to move. I don't think the other dogs did either, because they had cut off their attack, and with a whimper of defeat, the German Shepherd let out a yap of pain before being released by this being. The dog took off running, not at me, but away, with the other dogs following it, and I took off running home, not wanting to stick around any longer to find out what it was that saved my life. I've seen it again a couple years later while climbing a tree with my sister. One of the branches my sister was using to climb down broke, and she fell quite a ways down, and this being was so fast it went right over me, and it got to the bottom of the tree before she landed flat on her back on top of roots that were sticking out. I thought my sister was going to be hurt, at least the wind knocked out of her and some bruising, or even worse, as I rushed down the tree to join her. But none of that happened, and she just stared up at me in shock. I don't know if the being caught or not, because after I saw it, its movements only concentrated on getting down there to help my sis. We moved to another state, but I wouldn't see this being again until much older as an adult. It was strange seeing them here in Washington as well, and for some reason I felt it weird that having multiple encounters with these beings in totally different states across the map. The first encounter happened way before the movie Predator came out, but it does remind me of what I saw in many ways of the shimmering outline of a humanoid-like figure. What they are or their motives, I can't say for sure, but I'm only here to tell what happened because they do exist. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure people would have found my body parts scattered around in that park. Thanks for hearing me out. Signed, Nadine. The Visitors. This happened to me back in 2011 when my wife and I lived in our old house. I like to collect old rifles, bayonets, medals, helmets, and artifacts from the wars. That summer, I purchased a Finland-captured Mosin Nagant 9130 rifle. These were Russian guns that were picked from the hands of dead Russian and Ukrainian soldiers in 1939 and 1940. The Winter War, as it was called, was especially brutal and bloody for the invading Russians. Now, my wife is a nurse, and she's used to being around guns too, so she's not the squeamish type. I showed her this rifle, and I didn't really explain its history or origin. She gave me a kind of strange look and said she didn't like it, and I remember thinking at the time that was kind of odd. A few days after that, she told me that she woke up and there was a man with a helmet standing over our bed looking down at her. She was scared and closed her eyes. When she opened them a second later, the man was gone. I figured she must have been overtired from working so many night shifts. Maybe a week or two after that, we were lying in bed. Our two small dogs liked to sleep at the end of our bed by our feet. We woke up startled to hear something crashing by the entrance to our home, which was close to our bedroom. We all jolted up from sleeping, including our dogs. I don't know how to describe it. It was kind of like a mist or a shadow. I don't know exactly what form it took, but it appeared to be walking, and it crossed in front of our bedroom door. I thought our place had been broken into, so I ran into the living room to see what was happening. The dogs followed me. I couldn't see anything, but the dogs ran to the corner of the living room, and they were barking like crazy at something in the corner that I could not see. I didn't know what to think, so I went back into the bedroom with my wife. We just held each other close. She said she saw the same thing I did. The dogs wouldn't stop shaking for half an hour. I've never seen the dogs that scared before. I sold that gun a few weeks later, and I don't think I miss it. It got me thinking that some of these weapons were being held by dying men in their last moments, in extreme pain, and what energies might be left behind in them. This actually happened. Please just use my name, Anonymous. Incident at my grandparents' house. My step-grandparents owned a lot of property in the mountains of Morgan County, Utah. My siblings and I spent a lot of time exploring the woods, which were right behind my grandparents' house. Skip forward 20 years. My grandparents have long since passed away, but I still spend a lot of time in these mountains camping. Since it's private property, we don't see many people while camping there. I've experienced many strange things while there, but this is one of the strangest. Me and two of my friends were staying overnight in a trailer we had on the property. We were just talking and hanging out. All of a sudden, we heard a very loud, vibrating wind sound, and the trailer began to shake and sort of vibrate. It lasted about 30 to 45 seconds, then abruptly stopped. We all looked at each other, and I could tell they were just as confused as I was. We opened the door, and it was as calm as it had been right before this happened. There was no storm, no wind, no rain, nothing. I have no idea what it could have been. Another time, me and two different friends were hiking to a cabin that I had found in the woods on an earlier trip. You have to climb over a gate to get to the cabin, which was still about 300 feet through thick trees. I climbed over the gate first and started walking through the tall grass that was just before the trees. Then, on the path, about 20 feet in front of me, was a very, very large dog. The dog was all white with long hair and very dark eyes, and he was just sitting there staring at me. He didn't move or make a sound. I slowly started backing up and told my friend to back up also. My other friend was just getting over the fence and asked what we were doing. I told her we were trying to get away from the big dog without upsetting it. Both of my friends looked confused, but backed up, and we all went back over the fence. Then they told me that they didn't see any dog. I thought that was impossible because the dog was huge and sitting right in the middle of the path. It doesn't make sense. Thanks, signed TJ. Well, friends, what do you think about these stories? We always look forward to hearing from you in the comments section. If you have any video suggestions or topics you would like to see discussed on the channel, or if you have a strange encounter of your own that you would like to share, send us an email at our new address, nationalparkmysteriesyt@gmail.com. With that said, we really appreciate every single one of you for your support. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.